Hour 10 o'clock, having arrived, I call the Senate Appropriations Committee to order for our series of hearings reviewing the governor's 2017-2018 budget proposal, centered around his general fund budget proposal, but including other funds as well. I wanted to thank the members for their attendance the past several days and their attendance today. We start today's hearings with the Pennsylvania State System of Higher Education. Chancellor Frank Brogan. Chancellor, thank you for your attendance. Could you, before we begin, could you take an opportunity to introduce the people that are with you?
Yes, sir, I will. Thank you for giving me that opportunity. I'll start on my left. To my left is Lois Johnson, who works in our finance office. She is also today going to play the part of keeper of data. We like to get you as much on-the-spot data as we can during the meeting, as opposed to saying, we'll get back to you on that. So Lois is here just so that if someone asks a question, if she's got it, you'll get it before the meeting is over. But to my right is Dr. David Soltz. Dr. Soltz is the president of Bloomsburg University. He is completing his 9th year as president of Bloomsburg, and I will tell you up front, very sadly, but not for him, he will be leaving us at the end of this year to be in retirement with his wife. So he is joining us today, and he's done truly an outstanding job at Bloomsburg University. And to his right, we have Logan Steigerwalt. Logan is the student body president at Slippery Rock University, and he also serves as the chair of the board of all 14 state government presidents in our system. So he is the president of the presidents, if you will, and he's going to be graduating this year from Slippery Rock with a dual major in financing and marketing. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to introduce.
Thank you, Chancellor. Before we begin, could I ask you all to stand and be sworn, please?
Yes, sir.
Do you swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Please swear or affirm.
I do.
Thank you. Please have a seat. Chancellor, if you would wish, wanted to offer you an opportunity to provide some opening comments before we turn to our members for questions and comments.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members. Thank you for giving us an opportunity here this morning. I also did want to make another couple of very fast introductions to the gallery behind me. One of those is the chairperson of the Board of Governors for the Pennsylvania State System of Higher Education. Cindy Shapira is with us today, somewhere back there. There she is. We also have two board members who are your colleagues, who are seated members of the Board of Governors. And of course, one of those is Senator Judy Schwenk. And as always, we thank her for involvement and engagement. And Senator Ryan Almond is a relatively still new member of the Board of Governors and is very engaged already. And as you know, we have two members of the House who serve on our Board of Governors at the same time. We have two presidents with us today. President Fran Hendricks, who is the president of Mansfield University, is somewhere behind me, and also interim president at Shippensburg University. We've got a transition taking place at Shippensburg and a presidential search going on right now. Dr. Barbara Lyman, longtime provost, is serving now as the interim president during the transition there. So we welcome all of them and thank them all for being here today. Mr. Chairman and members, again, thank you for giving us the opportunity today. I will try to keep my preliminary comments as brief as possible because we're eager to try to answer the questions that you bring with you today. This is my 4th round of appropriations hearings as Chancellor of the Pennsylvania State System of Higher Education. My first came almost immediately after my arrival, so I was still finding my way, and it was in the Senate in the afternoon that day that one of the members asked, you're from Florida? And I said, yes, sir, I am. And he said, did you see the billboard when you drove across the Pennsylvania state line? I said, no, sir, what billboard was that? He said, it's the big billboard that says, welcome to Pennsylvania, we don't change anything. And of course, everybody laughed, just as we are here today. I'm laughing a lot less at that now than I was 4 years ago. So change is obviously in the wind in Pennsylvania and a necessary, very necessary part of building a future for this state. And it's no different in the Pennsylvania State System of Higher Education. We have an incredible history and historic tale to tell We're a system of 14 remarkable universities with talented, hardworking faculty members, staff members who are serving more than 100,000 students today. All 14 of our universities have served our Commonwealth for more than a century, many of them up to 150 or 175 years of age when they started as small, privately funded regional institutions of higher education, largely to try to keep home the students who could not go off and get a higher education degree elsewhere. The vibrancy of our system is directly tied to the vibrancy of the Commonwealth. We have over 500,000 living alum scattered all over the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania right now, the majority of them living and working and contributing mightily to our great state. As Pennsylvania wrestles with lagging revenues and rising operational cost, this is somewhat a national phenomena. Intense competition for growth, certainly with declining enrollment statewide and even nationally, the competition among higher education has probably never been more competitive than it is right now. We still want to thank you very much, as well as the governor, for supporting our students and our universities with increased investment over the past 2 years. The past 2 years really do reflect the first 2 years that this system has received additional funding in some years before some years previous to that. And the amount is always important, but nevertheless, just the fact that in these difficult economic times for Pennsylvania, and this year we're facing a $2 billion deficit, depending on which newspaper you follow, it still makes a statement that this system is still very, very important in a time where other states continue to cut funding for higher education. As you've seen in our materials, we're requesting an additional $61 million. That's to help offset our university's rising cost so that we can continue to keep our tuition affordable, most importantly, but at the same time continue to meet the rising costs, generally speaking, in higher education. We are still the most affordable and high-value higher educational offering in university and college world in a state that boasts about 350 institutions of higher education. Our desire and that of the board is to continue in that regard. The universities have been working together to develop planning tools that have been critical in helping us to chart a course for the future, and I'd like to sort of end on that note. This system, through its board, has made a profound decision that it is now well beyond time to take a serious look at how our system of higher education is organized. The one thing we all agree on, every president, every council member, every board of governors member, is the following: that the system as it currently is organized is unsustainable. If the math remains similar to what it is today, we will begin somewhere along the line to see the system reorganized by itself if we don't lift a finger first to reorganize it in the most effective way for the future. So by virtue of that fact, the dollars that we receive, the way we are organized, all needs to be examined. And just as other states are doing all over the country, look for ways to create more sustainable institutions in our system that can operate within the funding purview of where we are today and where we will be for some years to come for the future of the system and the institutions that it serves. We still have 1/3 of the projected job openings in this state are expected to require a bachelor's degree or higher. You hear that all the time on not only this committee, but various committees. A big part of what we do is help to fill that gap by the virtue of the fact that we are baccalaureate degree granting institutions in large measure. We help to create the workforce for Pennsylvania. So in these days and times, it is critical that we evaluate everything we do and everything we are. We've begun that process. We are putting the process together. It's predicated upon getting feedback from all of our prime constituencies around the Commonwealth, everyone. It especially starts with the people in the system, faculty, staff, administration, board members, but it doesn't stop there. It will include acquisition of feedback from our partners in the General Assembly, the governor's office, members of the private sector, corporate world, et cetera, so that we can not only look at what we do and how we do it internally, but then with the help of a consulting consulting firm look at the national landscape because, as I mentioned, many states are going through retrofit in the world of higher education among systems, just to see what's going on out there, to look for possibilities, probabilities, or perhaps things we don't want to consider, to make sure that whatever ends up coming out of the pipe here is not only sustainable for the future, but most importantly, meets the needs of the students today and those yet to come. The academic programs aligned appropriately, and the business model created in the most efficient, effective way possible to assure that the majority of our money is going to the classroom and to the laboratory to support the efforts of great faculty and students. The process itself has begun. We will get more deeply into it here over the next several months as we start to acquire feedback during the remainder of the academic year, and then pull together that information over the course of the summer and ultimately come up with recommendations for change for the future. So that is the general timeline. We cannot do this, nor should we, without the partnership of the General Assembly and the Governor's Office. But technically, these are your universities. They are here via Act 188, and therefore you should be and must be true partners in this responsibility as we look at the system and certainly recommend any changes for change to it. Act 188 will require change if we are going to affect any significant or sizable changes in the way we're organized at individual or collective universities. So be assured, we will keep you in the loop every step of the way. And certainly, when we are at a point to make recommendations for change, you will have to be and should be important partners in what those changes will be for the future. Yesterday, I also wanted to sort of end here, Mr. Chairman. A very important step was taken. As you know, probably, the Board of Governors met yesterday on a conference call. This was following rounds of meetings before that to talk about updates on all of our universities, but specifically one of our universities who is in arguably the most difficult position of financial stress. Currently being looked at by the accrediting body, Middle States, in terms of probationary status and what would be the future. The board yesterday made a couple of very important decisions and statements. Number one, to provide another round of provisional funding from the system to that institution for this next year. Without it, they could not meet their current obligations. It would be impossible. Two, at the same time, to note the fact that the model that is being worked on there today is not giving us sufficient success to be able to demonstrate that in any reasonable number of years, they will be in a financial position to be self-sufficient, revenues matching expenditures, and therefore during this next year begin whatever sizable change is necessary to put in place there a new model that will be able to be funded with revenue matching expenditures as quickly as possible. A task force will be created to assist the university with that, with prominent players on it, along with the university who will be charged with working on this. And this message is not just for that institution. This was a lateral message about everyone in the system, and the idea that moving money from other universities to prop up universities that are insolvent is mathematically no longer possible. So it is not just about one institution, it is part and parcel to the greater review of our system and what's got to come out of that to assure that we move from unsustainable to long-term sustainability for all 14 of our institutions. I want to end here. There's no preconception as to what will come out of the pipe. Because we've just started the process. But we will, by summer's end, hopefully be in a position to make those recommendations to everyone and keep you apprised again during the process so that there are no surprises in this process at the same time. So thank you all. Again, back to where we started. We still need to get through this next year. And again, we're facing about a $61 to $65 million deficit based on expected costs for this next year. There are three ways we generate money in our system. what we receive in appropriation, what we receive in tuition and fees, and if we need additional revenue that we don't have, obviously cuts to the budgets of the universities. And that's where we bring our case to you today in terms of understanding that more importantly than anything, and then over your deliberations, how we might address that. So I thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Chairman, to make those statements, and now, of course, put it back in your hands and would have happy to answer any questions that you all have.
Thank you, Chancellor, for your comments. Obviously, state system facing challenges like many state systems are across the nation, and we look forward to working with you in this committee, working with you to address and work through those challenges. So thank you for your comments. It's a means of platform for our conversation. Total funding available for the state system of higher education appropriated 16-17 is $444,224,000. Governor's proposed for 17-18, $453,108,000. That appropriation, the current appropriation, represents 27% of the total Pennsylvania state system higher education budget, the rest coming from tuition and fees. Total budget for the state system current year, $1,671,000,000, with the governor's proposal, not with the request made by the state system. A budget projected for upcoming cycle would be $1,702,000,000. I'll remind the members we're trying to do our best to stay on schedule here. We'll turn it to the standing committee chairs and then give each member 6 minutes for questions and comments. I will turn the mic over to our standing committee chair, Senator Eichelberger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chancellor, good to see you this morning.
You too, Senator.
The contract that was just completed for professors at the school, how much more is that going to cost the school each year? And I know there's varying amounts, so do you have any ideas? It's a 3-year deal, correct?
It is a 3-year deal. This being the first year for most of our bargaining units, it was a retroactive deal with ABSCUF, our faculty, back to 15-16, where it started, 17-18, 18-19. But all the rest of the bargaining units started this year and then went 2 years forward. The current year amount is $33 million system-wide, all in. Next year, the one we're actually here talking about today, is $49 million, all in. Does that answer your question, Senator?
That's $33 million additional dollars.
Additional dollars this year.
This year.
$49 million additional next year. Yes, sir.
Okay.
And that's all of the contracts included.
Yeah. And I asked you this before. Let me ask you this again. What is the, do you know what, maybe you don't know, do you know what the average salary is for these professors?
The average salary number is, yes, $85,000. That's average.
Average.
Yes, sir.
And do you know what the range is? The
sorry?
range. So
The
what's the low
range.
and high?
See if we've got that. The high, over $100,000. 55 to 100,000.
Okay, 55 to 100,000. And do you know the requirements for their work week? How many hours in the classroom, office time, things like that?
Yes, sir. The contract, of course, which we use, starts with a predicate that all faculty members must teach 12 hours a week, must hold 5 office hours a week, but then there are myriad other responsibilities that go beyond that, from advising, counseling, obviously grading papers and tests, as well as preparation for class time. The Snyder Report, which comes out of the legislative branch that is required annually, has faculty in our system, anyway, at 55 hours a week in terms of all responsibilities being reported.
Okay. the enrollment issue and where we are with looking at this. I thought you were going to have a study done by now that you were embarking on last year, but that didn't happen. How soon do you think you're going to start on a study now? I mean,
I'm sorry.
go ahead.
Yes, sir. We technically have begun. We are days away from securing the consultant. We have been working with our presidents to begin to put in place opportunities for collection of feedback on all the campuses. We specifically chose the rest of this year to make sure we take advantage of the fact that our campuses are full right now, of faculty, of students, et cetera, et cetera. So by, as I mentioned, the end of the semester, we will have concluded the collection of feedback to the greatest degree. We also want to use technology for that, to give people, anybody who wants an opportunity to weigh in on this issue, the chance to do that with the use of technology. Then we will use this summer to put it all back together and come up with recommendations for what it will look like, beginning as early as next year, if there are changes that we can begin as early as next year.
Okay.
Could I follow up on that real quickly?
Sure.
Senator? There are also some of our universities that have begun to make some rather significant announcements about change today, even in advance of this, not by coincidence, but by understanding that the model that is currently utilized has to change. And so we have a number of our universities that are already espousing, maybe you've followed some of that in the newspaper, their need to begin now to make some of those changes. The financial difficulties aren't waiting. They're stacking up, and therefore, even if we're in a position at the end of this summer to make the announcement about a lot of the changes we're looking at making, some of the financial difficulties are hitting universities hard today. And so we have a variety of them. Clarion has just announced that they would like to provide professional degrees for their region, nursing, teaching, et cetera. California University has announced that it would like to put a greater premium on technology as a university in their university, not only because it's an important issue, but because of the need in Western Pennsylvania to serve markets there. So just the conversation has already started, and some of the changes are going to be beginning soon without even waiting until this summer for some of those changes that will determine coming out of the study.
Good. Out of the 14 schools, I see that 13 of them in a 10-year snapshot have lost student enrollment. I don't understand why students choose schools. Maybe you can help me with that. Do they look at curriculum would be one issue, I'm sure. Their location, probably. If they live in a certain area, they're probably more likely to maybe go to a school there. Can you tell me, like, where do the kids come from that go to any one of these schools primarily? What are the reasons they choose those schools? So I'm trying to figure out why some schools have gained and others have lost.
Yes, sir. It's a great question. It's complicated, as you might imagine, because it's based on human beings, but there are clearly within that understandable characteristics. One is location. Our universities started 150 or 175 years ago, as I mentioned, as small, regional, privately funded institutions. That hasn't changed in 175 years. The market for the vast majority of our universities in the system are made up of regional students. That's the way the system has grown up. Many of our universities have also developed out-of-region markets. Dr. Solz may want to address that one if he'd care to. And then others have formed niche relationships with other states. That's been impacted over time based on what other states are doing to try to keep their kids home, but there's still some of that. We have a couple of universities that are defying the odds. Slippery Rock, right, out in the west, has an enrollment that continues to go up and defies the odds of the west. In the east, you've got East Stroudsburg up in the Pocono Mountains, but they're still drawing a healthy number of students, not only from their region, but also from across the border in New York and New Jersey. But suffice it to say, almost every one of our universities is grounded in the regional high school graduation rate. Dr. Solz, did you want to?
Sure, I'd be happy to add a little more information about Bloomsburg University. We are less regional than many of the universities in that almost 30% of our students come from the 5 counties around Philadelphia. And that's largely because through the many decades of producing outstanding teachers, we have lots of teachers in Bucks County, Montgomery County, the city of Philadelphia, and they're some of our greatest recruiters. So we have declined by about 4.5%. Most of that is in graduate programs, largely in education, for a number of reasons I can get into if you want me to. But our undergraduate decline has only been a little over 1%. So we are stronger because we're somewhat less regional. We still draw very strongly from the north central Pennsylvania area as well. Why do students come? It's my favorite question when I meet students. Academic programs is what draws them there. They hear about reputation through our marketing and through alumni. They come to campus, and we have a beautiful campus. We've done an excellent job of maintaining our campus and the infrastructure on the campus. And what I hear all the time is, we're not too close, but we're not too far. You know, we're 2 hours from Philadelphia. We're 2 hours from the major
That's
center.
technically for mother and father is what that means.
Exactly. That's it. You all know what I'm talking about. But outstanding faculty, you know, great reputation, quality of the campus, and location is clearly another factor.
Thank you.
One of the negative answer is, then why aren't they coming? Well, there are two answers to that. One is the nation is facing the baby boom echo. It did not sneak up on us. It's been coming statistically for 10 years, and there are just simply around the country less students coming out of high schools now, and will be for a period of time, than there were 10 years ago, for example. So that's a national phenomena, but it's one of two. The other one, and you touched on it, Senator, is just simply student and family choice. Families now have a huge buffet of choice available to them, more than ever, and they're making different choices in some cases than they have in the past, as well as that out-of-state factor that I mentioned, which has become more and more difficult for a state like Pennsylvania. We have so many border states, but those states aren't sitting idly by either. They're very busy price pointing and changing to keep their students home. So you put all of that together, we not only have the variable of general population decline in terms of students, but it's added to by market forces and decision-making on the part of families and students, and exacerbated in some places.
Yeah, just one follow-up on that, and that is, do you see things like new community colleges, which weren't there decades ago, if they're located close to one of your schools, does that have an impact? I imagine it would.
A good impact in that regard, because again, the relationship we've been trying to create more of between our system and the community colleges, which is a natural marriage of flow of students, is twofold. Number one, trying to help students be able to navigate the 2+2, get your associate's degree, and then come on to one of our universities close by to finish it off with a baccalaureate. But at the same time also, because we now have capacity on our campuses, if you had to capture with one word what the issue is that we're dealing with these days, it's plenty of capacity. So you either sit and continue to pay for buildings that you're not using, or you find innovative ways to use them. And one of the things we've been talking about is the possibility of actually bringing community colleges onto our campuses for purposes of satelliting opportunities for students away from the main community college branch, if the community colleges think that that would be helpful to them in using facilities that are available.
Let me just ask you one last thing, Mr. Chairman, and that is, when you have the drawdown of the system to prop up some schools that are having financial issues, are we losing the competitive edge at some of the schools where then they can't get the latest equipment, they can't get something that they need to move ahead and excel and keep up with technology and other things because of the drawdown of funds across the board?
Yes, sir. I'll answer that this way. Out of our 14 universities, we don't have one of them that is rich. Contrary to the myth that we have several that are big and robust and have plenty of money to throw around, the funding that we receive from the state is back to where it was in 1994, and we still have 10,000 more students today than we did, even with enrollment declines over the past years, than we had in 1994. So the answer to the question is, nobody in our system has a slush fund that they can tap to provide to anybody else without having an impact on that university. Some more than others, clearly, but it's across the board.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Eichelberger. Minority Standing Committee Chair, Senator Dinniman, followed by Senator Argel.
Good morning, Mr. Chancellor and and the other members of the panel. If I heard you right, you said that moving money from any other university to others is no longer possible, and in answering the last question you said is no longer the correct answer, or the right process to follow. So I represent a district in which Westchester University is there. So I can now go back and assure the faculty and the president of that university, that is the position of the chancellor, that no longer will money be taken from us, as you well know has been done in the past in the millions of dollars to support other universities. Is that the position?
Well,
I'm just quoting what you were saying.
As is often the case in the General Assembly, one should stray from the words never and always. It is the position of the board that is not what they would like to do going forward in terms of long-term commitment. It would never.
Is it your position, sir?
Is what my position?
Is the fact that to rob Peter to pay Paul, to destroy the excellence of one university, which I think is what Senator Eichelberger was getting at, to help a university which is in difficulty or not, or fading for whatever the reason may be, is not an answer for the state system.
The answer cannot lie in long-term financial prop-up of individual institutions by the rest of the system. Yes, sir, that is my position, and clearly that's the position of the board as well.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, and I'm glad to communicate that to my constituents. The second question is this, is when you appeared here last year, you talked about a task force, and we asked you if it would be ready for the budget year last year. You told us no, but it would be ready this year. So what I'm trying to understand is that many of us were anticipating that what you promised last year, which you're now promising again, would be ready for us so that we could use it as we face a very difficult budget and make decisions. Why was this not done, or what was the problem of getting it done? We're in the same. It's like sort of like Groundhog Day, you know, deja vu. We're in the same movie. We're in the same place, same time, but a year later.
Yeah. Well, we're now actually in a position to be able to give you a timeline, as I've mentioned twice now. By this summer, you will have recommendations along with us that will necessitate change going forward. We have not been idle on this issue since last year. As a matter of fact, you can ask presidents. We've been very busy lining up appropriate data, looking at the way we're organized, trying to get a better handle on academic program alignment, or in some cases, lack of academic program alignment, so that we could then officially begin a process to examine exactly where we are so that we can determine exactly where we need to go. So it was not by virtue of the fact that anyone was dragging their feet or not interested in the subject. This is an issue that's been ongoing. We're just now in a position where we literally can say it has officially started and the terminus will be by this summer.
One of the difficulties that faces us, whether it be in basic education or whether it be in secondary or university education, is the slowness in which education responds to the question before us. So while I understand your effort to align everything, I'm simply making the point that the same question was asked last year, the commitment was made for this year, it's not done. I'm glad to know that it will be done by the end of the summer. That's the point. Because universities and educators somehow will take forever to come to something, as my Republican colleagues would say, a business would be bankrupt by the time these decisions are made. And I know a university and government is not a business, but the point is, why does it take so much time when there's a crisis that's before us?
Yes, sir. I am fond of saying higher education won't change a light bulb that's out without thinking about it for about 10 years. You and I will join forces at the end of the summer when those recommendations for change hit the table, and we hear the converse, which is, how did you do that so fast?
Of course.
But I would rather you and I be able to argue that point than why are we still talking about it. So yes, sir, you have not only my assurance, but the assurance of the board that this process has begun, will continue, and that it needs to be expedited. And by the way, Senator, and you know this better than many, it needs to be expedited for two reasons. It's the right time to do this, and also, if we don't, we're going to see the math take over and reorganize this system by itself without a thoughtful approach to the future of these universities. So the urgency has never been greater.
Well, I'm happy to hear that, and just asking questions, because so much we do in higher education. We spend so much money, not money, but time, and in the end of Governor Corbett's term, coming out with a report of higher education where we looked at what the state related, what the state owned, what the private university would do, and it sits on a shelf, and it's been on that shelf for 3 years. Mm-hmm. And so whether it was under Corbett or even under Governor Wolf now. So I'm glad to hear that the financial crisis that is being faced by the state, that the universities themselves understand that we can no longer have things sit on a shelf, but we have to solve it. And I'm also happy to hear that the solution is not to harm the institutions that have been successful.
Senator, there needs to be, I don't want to steal your time.
You're not.
At the end of this, there needs to be an advantage for every university to be a part of a system. Mm-hmm. If the only advantage you bring to the table is sharing some of your money with people who are struggling, that's not much of an incentive or a rationale to be a part of a system. So it has to be important to all 14 institutions when this is completed to validate the fact that there is an inherent worth to being a part of a system, and that's what we're after at the same time. We are also going to keep pointed at Act 188 and the two prescriptions that we must continue, whatever we end up looking like, to be the most affordable and high-quality educational experience that a student can find in higher ed in the Commonwealth.
Well, that leads actually to the third question. I hope I'm building on some of what Senator Eichelberger was trying to get at, since we try to work as partners in it, as chairman should. You've made the case, and it's absolutely true, that the state system is the most affordable and adds the highest value to a student. I understand demographics, and I understand family choice. But when I talk to families, the key situation is we can't afford sending our kids anywhere if you have 2 or 3 kids. So what's mystified me is why the barriers which the state system talks about, which is where they're located, or their reputation or family choice. The key concern of parents is simple: to get my kids through college without huge student loans. And why has that simple fact not created the number of students in the state system? We should be bursting out the doors considering the double, triple price that some of the other schools have. I talk to parents who will say to me, if I knew more about these state schools, I don't care if it's in the woods. If it's 21,000 all total and prices are 23 with everything, and I have to pay 40 or 50 or now at Penn and others over 60,000 a year, they're going to the woods. And so I just don't quite understand why we're not bursting the doors. I mean, even if there are less students, even if family are making choices, if this matter of money is one of the key choices.
Several reasons. One is the fact, again, that this is still today the most competitive state, arguably, in the country. Mm-hmm. Not only generally, but we have to post up against a huge number of private institutions that are very good at price poisoning for students. And they make it competitive in terms of what they're willing to do now for students. And I don't fault them for that. They have the latitude to be able to do that and make individual decisions for students to make it more attractive to attend there. The second one is the public competition within the systems. We post up against 22 branch campuses for Penn State University, and a great university, but they are price pointing on many of those 22 branch campuses, many of which can be seen from the second floor of Old Main on most of our campuses. And yet they are siphoning students by being price competitive within the same region where they would typically attend, and I'm generalizing, please, the local public state university. They are attending the branch campus of Penn State. And by the way, this is something that's been in place here for a long, long time. So that's not meant to be a shot across anybody's bow who's here today. But it is draining the population of students that we have. So there's a variety of reasons for that. I'm not sure any of them are good, but they're all contributing factors to what we're dealing with.
These reasons you gave now made more sense than the demographics or the family choice, which is another reason why the fact that this report is still sitting there, the report was to address the very subject that you said. It was the higher education report, which the then chancellor sat on, presidents of the university sat on, hours and hours of time were spent, was to address this duplication of courses, of programs throughout the Commonwealth. And so my frustration is just not with the state system. My frustration is the reports come out, we spend the time, your study will come out, but we fail to utilize this information, and it sits there, and hopefully that won't happen again. Finally, but even before finally, by the way, on the Schneider reports, I'm going to put in a bill to get rid of them, but they're useless. All you do is, anyone remembers Senator Schneider? He was here, and it came to a question of how do we know faculty's working? So you fill out this thing where you self-disclose what you do. And you could put down anything you want to put down because no one questions what you put down. So if you put down I've seen people put down 80 hours, 75 hours. And so this, if we want accountability in terms of faculty work, let me say to my colleagues, the Schneider report is not the answer. Schneider is long gone, and so should these reports be gone, because it was not the right approach to accountability. Final question is this: what are the indicators and the metrics you're going to use in this study? Because I know you're going to get the campuses involved, and I know you have a deadline, but what are these metrics and indicators so we have some idea of what you're trying to do, or how you're measuring accountability and how you're measuring success?
As you might imagine, many of the metrics are going to be ones that everyone is used to, but they're still very important. Mm-hmm. Enrollment and enrollment trends, issues of cost per student, and we've developed a new tool that's not out yet for prime time, but it is to get a better handle on actual cost per student to degrees. It is about looking at the academic array and seeing how that matches up with something that we're doing now. You've heard us talk about, and really love to share this with you, not obviously in this venue, but at another time, perhaps caucus meetings, the work we've been doing on what's called the supply-demand gap analysis. What are the jobs in the Commonwealth? What degrees do they require? Are they oversaturated, under capacity? How much does it cost to get that degree, et cetera, to try to give people better opportunity to track from entry into a university to a diploma and on to the workforce with greater efficiency in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So we're going to be looking at, obviously, and we have to, a huge number of metrics. Many of them will be the ones everybody is used to looking at: the diversity of our student population, which is in many ways mirrors the diversity of the state today, but how those trends are changing, and try to then look at the financial metrics, because no matter what you're doing and how you're doing it, if you can't afford to do it that way anymore because of the math, you have an immediate problem. So that's why I go back to the word sustainable. We have to also look at forecasts for the future to try to determine what can be sustainable at an institution over the long haul to assure that it's organized in a way where it can pay its bills with the money it generates, whatever that happens to be.
Let me suggest, as the chairman and I, my chairman, Senator Eichelberger, the majority chairman, is that you send to Senator Eichelberger to share with me, and I think you should do the same with the House, is the metrics and indicators you're using. So that we can have the input into how you're making these judgments. If we're partners in this effort,
Right.
We say the same thing, by the way, to the Pennsylvania Department of Education. So if you could send them to us, the two minority chairs, but it's fine to send them through Senator Eichelberger, and he'll show it to me. But we really need to be able to have some input. And you might want to, whether Senator Brown and Senator Hughes would like these or not, I think it would be useful to send it to the two appropriations chairs as well. But this at least gives us some input into the process. Thank you.
Yes,
Mr.
sir.
Chairman, you've been most patient with me.
And as I stated, we will be sharing along the way through the appropriate committees with the members who request beyond that, where we are and what we're doing along the way. So it is not just to expect something being slid under your door this summer that says, here's the recommendations for the change for the system.
Well, it's not only the sharing, it's how you go about doing your work and the research, and that's the key. If you don't use the right indicators and metrics, what you share with us can be biased, so we simply, or potentially biased, so we
Understood.
simply want to know what they are. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Understood.
Thank you, Senator Dinnerman. Senator Orgel, followed by Senator Schwank.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chancellor, certainly a 13, 14% decrease in the number of your students is a very concerning number, and I'm one of those that's very happy to hear that you've got an action plan moving forward. In terms of the study, who will be doing the study?
The consultant, the consulting firm, sir, is that what you're
Okay,
saying?
all right, so you're-
that is being decided right now. The RFP is out, we've got the responses, and are very close in that process to
Okay.
being able to identify who will work with us on that.
How much is it likely to cost?
We said during the RFP that it had to come in under $500,000.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Will the study include the possibility of some form of collaboration, whatever that means, with Penn State, Pitt, Lincoln, the state-relateds?
Yes, it is impossible, and I should have said this earlier, I apologize, but because I say it regularly, it's going to be impossible for us to do just a study of our system and assemble recommendations for change without looking at the rest of the higher education landscape.
So the independents as well as the community college, everyone.
Yes,
is,
sir.
is there anything that's off the table in this study?
No, sir.
Okay.
And people take that as they want to out there.
Understand.
But that broad statement has been made from the beginning of this process. Everything has to be on the table. If sacred cows are created along the way, they'll stack up in the pasture to the point where nothing will happen.
Whenever
Everything
an
has to be on.
institution studies itself, it can always there can be questions of independence, accountability. How are you going to be sure that this study asks the tough questions and develops appropriate, accountable, independent answers, not just telling you what you want to hear?
Yes, sir. First of all, inclusion. For example, we have 4 members of the General Assembly that are seated full voting members of the Board of Governors who will be intimately involved in this process and can both look at those issues, Senator, individually, but also be our liaisons regularly back to their colleagues in the appropriate chambers. 2, as I mentioned, we want to start to reach out to individual committee chairs for purposes of identifying opportunities and possibilities about appearance, to talk about where are you now, what are you doing today, what's going on along the way, to make sure we are getting that kind of input.
Okay.
You all are the elected representatives of the people of Pennsylvania, and this is your system by legislative fiat. So obviously, you've got to be partners in this process along the way.
That brings me to an obvious next question then. Last session, people in my district had asked me to introduce a Senate resolution to commission what sounds to be a similar study through the Legislative Budget and Finance Committee. They're asking me to do that again. Does it make sense to have 2 separate parallel studies going on at the same time?
I would answer this way, Senator. I'm not sure there's a right answer to that, but I would answer this way. For the Board of Governors who oversees the system to lead the charge on this, as they have and are, but still work collaboratively with the General Assembly as we should and must, is probably the right idea. Whether that requires parallel official tracks or whether there is just a general agreement that this is going to be done together throughout, I guess we could debate. I would recommend the former over the latter. We are off and running on this thing very publicly. We've laid out, as I said to Senator Dinniman, a very aggressive timeline on this, and that was intentional. But we have also stated repeatedly that we cannot and should not do this without you all as full partners in this. So we will respond to anything you all do, of course, that's your prerogative, but we're making the aggressive case early that we fully intend to work with you on this regardless of whether
I think
there's
the bottom line, we all agree that these numbers are very concerning and that we've got to do something so that this institution isn't just something that can series of institutions that talking about its proud past, but also a proud future. I've told you in the past, the first member of my father's family, I think in 1,000 years to go to college, was my grandfather Argyle at the Kutztown Normal School in 1928. And I know that those institutions have changed a lot since Grandpa and my parents went to those schools. But we want to make sure that these numbers don't continue to look this dire in the future, and I look forward to working with you on that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Senator Argyle, thank you very much. Senator Schwank.
Thank you. First, I would like to greet some of the members that you've brought along with you, Chancellor. Good to see your staff that's here today. Our president, our student president, our representative, thank you so much for being here. You hopefully will get some questions that will get to some of your thoughts on this. After all, you're the ultimate customer, right? So we ought to be asking you some of this too. And good also to see our board chair, Cynthia Shapira, who has been, since she's come on board, really amazing in her dedication to the effort and her time as well. I'll note, you mentioned this yesterday, Chancellor, or you mentioned this earlier. We had this board meeting, a board call yesterday, and I'll note for my colleagues here on the Appropriations Committee that the vote to, one, go forward on the study, and also the cash infusion to Cheney University was a unanimous vote. It included both, the House representatives to the Board of Governors as well as the Senate. So we are dedicated to going forward on this and making sure that we get the right product here. Getting to, the issue of why we're even talking about a study. I mean, this has been building over a number of years. And I'll note, in defense of not just you, Chancellor, but of the board, we were very tied up in negotiations in the past year in trying to get contracts resolved as well in terms of, moving forward on some of the issues that we've identified. But I'll cut to the chase on this. Tell me a little bit about cash flow, because ultimately that's, that gives us a real clear snapshot of where we are right now and how we got to where we are. So can you give me some idea on the, the member institutions, our 14 system members, where we're at on cash flow, and those that, you don't have to name them necessarily, but those that are really on the edge of insolvency?
Yes, ma'am. You have, as you might imagine, out of 14 universities, a wide swing on the issue of cash flow. And you're right, cash flow is the mother's milk.
Right.
You got to pay the bills, whatever those bills are. And there are, as I mentioned, the only available revenues we have, which is state funding, subsidy, and then tuition and fees. Those are the two pots of revenue we have available to pay those bills. By virtue of that fact, we have institutions, we dealt with one yesterday that is by any definition insolvent. In other words, can't meet their current cash flow obligations. And then we have universities that are closing in on that position, who are clinging to this rework of the system, obviously for all the right reasons, and recognizing the need for change, and it's imperative beginning now. They are, in many ways, through their operational budgets, for the most part, and even in many ways, going through their operational reserve accounts to pay for things that reserves typically don't pay for, but that's the money that they have remaining. And the possibility that some could, at some point, with the math not changing through reorganization, et cetera, or the money from the state not changing, whatever it happens to be, tuition and fees remaining the same, if the math remained current, could move beyond that cash flow problem from their operating reserves to having to leverage loans against their own auxiliary reserve accounts. Auxiliaries meaning dormitories, housing, meal plans, et cetera, et cetera. Those reserves are typically reserved for those issues, but that could provide an additional source of revenue. But therein lies the urgency to do what we're sitting here talking about right now, because I consider that approach, while perhaps necessary, to be almost tantamount to paying off a credit card with another credit card. It doesn't really solve your problem. It only keeps the wolf at bay a little bit longer. And that's why I think, back to Senator Dinniman's good question, why all of a sudden the urgency? Well, the urgency has been there for some time, but nothing moves people more to change, even though change is the thing that hurts people in their mind the most. Nothing moves people more to change than a drastic circumstance. And we're beginning to see that in growing number in our system, with the math remaining what it has been. And with no change, if we did not reorganize the system, if we did not look at what is the time-tested belief that we were once, and please work with me on making up these numbers to make a point, we were at one time at 4,000 students, we're now down to 2,000 students, but we'll continue to operate like we have 4,000 students because we'll grow back into that over time. And therefore, as you do that, you are eating up all of your operational budget, you are eating up your reserves, and you're still not growing back, and therefore you get into these situations. So the change has got to be, if you want to remain and you've got 2,000 students, you need to articulate that 2,000 students around the academic programs you offer and the business model that you utilize.
Well,
simple, revenues matching expenditures.
Well, getting back to the cash flow issue, are there institutions now that are in danger of running out of cash in the near future, let's say the spring semester or by the fall semester?
Cash is defined the way I did, in that their operational and reserve accounts could be depleted virtually completely by late summer or fall, but totally out of cash based on ability to leverage against auxiliary for another year. And so no one is going to be totally out of cash by that definition by this summer, but totally out of cash is a possibility with nothing changed, again, by the following summer.
Despite
and that's why
the
imperative to
infusion
do this.
of, what the governor is offering in terms of an increase.
Yes, and I should qualify that. I'm using no change.
Okay.
If we receive more money from the legislature, if we receive what the governor recommended, that can provide some additional help. But and would be welcome, obviously, especially to some of the universities who are in the most difficult position. But to create meaningful, and then again, I hate to overuse this word, but it's true, sustainable situations for universities, and not just rely on will we or won't we get some more money this year. It's going to take fundamental and infrastructure changes to make
Well,
that happen.
I think you've hit on the urgency for us doing a study that does not sit on the shelf. And I would only comment to my colleagues here, we've got to have the fortitude then to make the changes that this study will recommend. And that's the reason why studies sit on the shelf, is because we don't choose to do something. But I sitting on the board, of course, and I'm engaged, I go to the meetings as best as I can and participate. I recognize the urgency of doing this, and we'll have to stay on task as well.
And I
Thank
would
you.
say this, other states around the country are going through this identical process. What we do will be tailored for us, but this urgency is happening all over. And to put a fine point on your good comments, Senator, I have a colleague in a state that will remain unnamed who had announced that that person and their board was ready to begin a serious look at reorganizing that system. That person got a call from the governor saying, not on my watch, you don't. And it doesn't matter who that is, but it actually did occur. Here, we are fortunate that we've got a General Assembly, both sides of the aisle, and a governor who believe that this is urgent, that we have got to do this in the best interest of the system and then therefore the Commonwealth. So we're beginning from a bit of a different platform than some states have.
Senator Martin, followed by Senator Baker.
Thank you. Thank you, Chancellor, for being here. Appreciate the opportunity to ask you some questions. To follow up on a question from Senator Eichelberger, he had asked you about salaries. Do you happen to know what the percentage is, the additional benefit costs, and on average?
Lois? She's sort of the Yoda of this
All in,
operation.
yeah.
It depends on.
I'm sorry.
It depends on which employees you're talking about. For some of our lowest paid employees, their benefit costs are actually more than what their salary is.
Because the salaries are lower, correct.
Right, absolutely. But I would say on average for all of our compensation, it's about around 50% of overall salaries.
Around 50% of overall salaries, okay. In terms of with reduced enrollment, the history of staffing reductions that kind of reflected, and you mentioned about revenues meeting expenditures. What is the history of that with the declining enrollment? Are we seeing a decline in obviously the utilization of faculty? Are we mothballing buildings? What's going on right now?
Great question. As far as staff, all staff is concerned, we're about 1,000 staff members less today than we were 10 years ago. It is typically done through attrition, and there have been some furloughs, some layoffs. I don't want to disregard that as non-existent. It has existed, but generally speaking, we're about 1,000 employees less than we were 10 years ago. The second part of your question was facilities, and therein lies one of our problems. Mothballing facilities is, and it's the same term we use, but that denotes to people that they're not only off the schedule, there's no cost associated. A number of our universities that are having the greatest decline in enrollments are still paying $1 million to $1.5 million a year to heat them, cool them, and maintain them, even though they're not using them. That's one of the really negative but quiet effects of declining enrollment, is you still got to keep those facilities up. Some of our universities have gone on very aggressive demolition approaches. Lock Haven is a good example. The oldest facilities that, instead of renovating or trying to bring them up to code in a day and time where there is enrollment decline, just absolutely didn't make sense to them. So they have put in place a fairly aggressive demolition schedule for buildings. But there again, I have found in higher education, Senator Dinniman, that there is a predisposition to believe that any building that's on a campus is so special that it can't be demolished. We have a propensity to put people's names on buildings, giving them some additional special status in terms of whether or not they should be demolished. There's a politics around that, but the bottom line is we can't afford to bleed $1 million to $1.5 million at some of our universities as we are today, while we're fighting to find money to put into classrooms and laboratories that are actively going. So it's a big issue we're wrestling with now.
Okay. One thing that hasn't been mentioned yet, when we talk about declining enrollment and trying to figure out the reasons why, is obviously the proliferation of online degree programs. So obviously that's opened up a whole new competition market. I guess my question is, I know obviously some of the institutions, maybe all, have kind of ventured into doing that. I guess is where the world is going with technology, is that something that can even be recovered from? When we look at the bricks and mortar kind of setups that we have now, do we continue to see more people doing it from the comfort of their living room as opposed to actually attending a bricks and mortar institution?
Another great question. I'm not being gratuitous, it really is. That has an impact on new programming. When we look at establishing a new program at a university, one of the first things we talk about is, can that program be competitive in the world today? Just offering a program online is great, but when you put it online, why will people take it, especially if it is one of many, many nationally and internationally? And is there an economic advantage to putting it online? Not just an access advantage, but an economic advantage to doing it online. I will give you a personal bias, okay? I'm inclined to do that. It gets me in trouble, but nevertheless, I believe this. For higher education, not just here, but anywhere in systems, to create redundant online programs, redundant meaning, in our case, let's play the game, 14 instructors online teaching exactly the same course and charging different rates, and marketing, paying marketing fees and production fees, having to create specialized assessments 14 times, to me personally makes no sense at all. The whole idea of technology and its usefulness in the area of education, generally speaking, is to be able to tamp down redundancy and create greater efficiency, and that efficiency can be passed along to students by less cost. So that is something this system, I believe, and we're getting on that one too, needs to take on. Yes, sir, everybody is offering online education. So that's less of a problem when asked, do you guys do online education? Yes. But that isn't the problem. The problem is it necessary for it to be every man for himself? And are there greater efficiencies at looking at a better way to organize? Shouldn't one of the advantages to being a part of a system on an issue like this being pooling resources and the genius of faculty so that we can create not just programs online, but high quality, the best instructional opportunity and assessment opportunities for students that money can buy. And we've got work to do on that one in our system.
Well, I really hope, and I'd like to get one last question in, but I really hope this study that's done and put together, and I can say this as a proud Millersville grad, and a couple of my staff members are as well, to really take a look at the amenities war that's going on, not only to compete for other institutions, but even within our system itself. I mean, in a lot of ways, my home institution, I don't even recognize anymore, and I don't know how much that's even really classroom related. It's the amenities related things. But the last part I'd like to ask is, just regards to transparency, obviously making a decision to get a degree or to go to college is a huge investment for families. And we all know that the economy changes, where the jobs are, where the family sustaining wages are. How much can we count on the institutions that when a family wants to research, where I want to go to school, the various degree programs that they offer, where the success is in those areas? What's the average debt that you're going to take on? Or what's the graduation rate in that major, and what's the likelihood of even finding a job? We all have a great vision our kids can be whatever they want to be. But we obviously realize too that reality sometimes hits them in the face, and what they end up paying for an education, they don't end up even coming close to and working in many times. So what is the future, and to be able to go and look and say, hey, I'm looking at Millersville and say, where are the jobs at now? What's the highest chance that that investment's going to deliver the biggest bang for our buck? Because us as appropriators and making an investment into where that is, because that is the end goal, right, is family sustaining wages, right? It's not just the experience of college. Can you comment on that?
Yes, sir, and we're really proud of the work that's going on right now in our system on this issue. I call it consumer education. People should not be making choices about where to go to school based on even important issues like the color of the room in the dormitory, or is it Taco Tuesday? These decisions need to be made by families based on good, accurate data. And even if a student, and most of ours don't, come to us with a major degree choice already having been made, the greater clarity that we can provide before they arrive as to what you can get at Millersville, what those degrees can translate to the world of work in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, not just in terms of available jobs in those areas, but starting salaries in those areas. What will it cost to get a degree in any of those areas so that they can plan and budget accordingly, and give all of that information in a very easily understood format so people don't have to navigate the technology 1,000 different ways to put it together themselves. And we're working on that as we speak with that supply-demand gap analysis. Parents and families and students need to have as much easily synthesized information as possible to make one of the most important decisions that they'll ever make. Where am I going to go, and ultimately what degree? And even for those students who come to us without that decision having been made, as they work with their faculty and advisors and counselors regularly, be able to ultimately chart a course as to where they want to go, and not just because they took a course that was interesting, but it was an interesting course, and pique their interest in what are the possibilities that are out there in that field, in that track. And so you can only do that with great information. That's what we're putting together. That's the information I talked about earlier that I'd love to share with all of you in a different forum, because I think it's not only appropriate for us, I think it has a very big impact. We're working with the Department of Labor, L&I on this issue. They're very intrigued by what we're doing and think it has translational probabilities across systems.
I'm out of time, but thank you very much for your answering the questions.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Glad to do it.
Senator Baker, followed by Senator Vogel.
Chancellor, welcome. Good
Thank you,
morning.
Senator. Good morning.
I appreciated that you said there will be no sacred cows as you begin to look at the system. My one simple question would be, does that also include going back and revisiting the infrastructure of the system office as a whole? I was one of the last graduating classes in Shippensburg under the old system, which we all had great hopes for transitioning. But I think as you're looking at the overall infrastructure, do we need the current system structure that we have? Is that part of the review that you're going to be looking at? Are you going to be looking broader at construction projects on campus and operational costs, conditions of infrastructure, how much debt load our foundations are holding for those beautiful new dorms that our students are paying for, but are off your budget? So are those the kinds of things that are the sacred cows that you are going to be continuing to look at?
Yes, thank you, Senator. I stated rather emphatically in my State of the University System speech 2 weeks ago that has created quite a buzz. It was intended to do that. But among other things, the fact that we have to look at everything, and I'm not quoting, I'm paraphrasing, but it's pretty close, including the Office of the Chancellor. If we reorganize the system, but we keep everything else the same, it will be impossible to assume that we're going to be able to serve the universities.
I'm happy to hear you say that. I
mission.
really think as part of this, we need to look at it. We need to look at how much debt load some of the institutions are carrying that many of us on this committee don't even know about. Do you have a general idea of potentially what that debt load may be among the systems?
We can tell you by university exactly what the debt load
I think as part of the structured review, that will be crucial and very important. And also looking at what the campuses can do to adjust not only your programs, but be more creative in meeting the demographic challenges. Is that part of what you'll be looking at?
Yes, ma'am.
So knowing all of that, the RFP is being evaluated and reviewed. Once that RFP is issued, will that be public information that those of us can have to look at your scope of work and potentially provide recommendations to those who are doing this study, that perhaps there are things many members on this committee would like to see included in that?
Yes, Senator, we will share that in terms of the charge then, not just for what we expect of the consulting firm to do with us, but what the charge for this whole process will look like. What are the expectations in terms of what is it you want to accomplish by the end of the process? So,
and my final question is, how will you engage students as part of that, and having Logan here, I'd certainly like to ask you a question that you're here since you're connected to students across the system as you're ready to graduate. Where do you see the need for us as elected officials to begin looking at reevaluating the system based on your experience, both as a leader on campus and as someone set to go into the work world?
Thank you very much for the question. And as a student, I feel like students really value being part of this system because we are one of small classroom sizes. I feel like that's a big factor that I personally went to Slippery Rock for, was the small faculty to student ratio. And I feel like students really appreciate that. And just the variety of offerings that are being offered at all these schools is huge for students. To continue, I'm sorry, can you repeat your question?
No, I guess from your perspective, where do you see what you're hearing from both students at Slippery Rock or the other leaders that you're engaging in? What are the concerns and worries of those students? What are the things that they see potentially that we need to consider moving forward? And even to take that question back as part of this process, I really think focus groups with students have to be a critical component of any evaluation. So your involvement and helping to direct based on your current experience. My experience at Shippensburg is somewhat dated, but I loved my time there and value my system and value what it means. But I think it would be important for us to know where you see things headed.
Some of the concerns from students that I've heard is, what is the value of my degree? Like, what is the value of my degree from Slippery Rock as compared to one from Pitt, which is very close in Pittsburgh? How am I able to compete with those coming out of that school with a similar GPA and similar experiences in a job in which I'm aligned up with other competitors? I feel like Slippery Rock, and especially state schools in general, do a good job of giving us experiences that are able to set us apart. For example, Penn State, you're one of 50,000 students, but at the state school level, you're one of 10,000, 8,000. And I feel like if this committee is able to give us the opportunities in which we are able to excel in experiences, along with a great degree from a great state system, I feel like that would be able to set us apart. So going back to my main point of how can we tell our students of how we can compete, and this goes to another point that a previous senator brought up, is where will these jobs come from? And I feel like that's one of the major concerns that students have is, once I graduate, what's the next step? Something that Slippery Rock is doing in particular is having a little bit of a transitional period. We are taking different classes of how to get a mortgage, how to budget, how to create finances. And I feel like if Pennsylvania, as the state system as a whole, is able to get that information out to the students right away in high school and say, this is where jobs are located, this is your starting salary, I feel like that would definitely alleviate some concerns, especially as a graduating senior. I know the direction that I'm headed in generally, but I wish I knew that 3-4 years ago when I first applied to the state. And I feel like that would even be beneficial in acquiring students too. You can say, hey, these are past experiences of students that have graduated. This is the trend we're seeing. And then based off information on that, I think that even students on the bubble of which they would choose like a Pitt at Penn State over perhaps a Bloomsburg or a Kutztown may say, you know what, for the cost differential, these state schools are really able to give me an education that's parallel to them, plus the experiences might actually set them apart in return on their investment. So I feel like where we can go next is definitely a huge concern of students, and if there's a way to address that, that would be huge.
Senator, if
Thank
I
you so
might,
much.
I apologize. Did
No, I
interrupt?
was just going to say thank you to Logan. I see the light is off and my time is up. But Chancellor, I'm taking the liberty if you have
Just
one
very
final
quickly,
thought.
I want to assure you that one of the requirements of whoever gets this consulting contract is to help us establish those listening posts. That's why we do want to use the rest of this semester while we have students and faculty and administrators on all of our campuses to be able to do just the kind of outreach to get feedback while we've got them there.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator Vogel, followed by Senator Yaw.
Good morning, Chancellor. How you doing this morning?
Morning, sir.
Good. I'm going to sort of kind of circle back around to the cash flow issue. And I was sitting on my couch a week or so ago and was off here watching TV and saw commercials for, I won't name the schools, but Western Pennsylvania schools in your system advertising on TV in the Pittsburgh media market. And I was wondering, what are the criteria or dynamics, or what is their advertising budgets, or how can they actually be one commercial and 2 minutes later is another commercial for another school in the same TV station? What are their advertising budgets and how do they do that? And what is, I mean, actually they're just basically competing against each other in the Pittsburgh media market on TV. And how are their budgets set up, or what are they allowed to use for advertising, et cetera?
No, good question. And if you'll allow me, I'm going to turn to a guy on the ground here, maybe as an example of how Bloomsburg makes those kinds of decisions. But I'll preamble by saying it's up to each individual university how they want to do that, how much available money they have to be able to do what they do. But Dr. Solz, did you want to address how Bloomsburg deals with that?
Well, it's a fairly complex analysis, but it's part of the overall enrollment management strategy is the recruiting. And we do very little television advertising. It's just been a choice we've made. We do a lot of billboard advertising, and frankly, we use social media much more than almost anything else. But every university does have a somewhat different strategy. It does, we do advertise fairly heavily in New Jersey. We don't exclude Pennsylvania students because of that, but they do pay 2.5 times the salary. The tuition, they pay more than the cost of their education. And that helps us balance our budget by bringing in about 10% out-of-state students. So we focus the market, but social media is really the primary way Bloomsburg University has chosen constant communication with the students that are in the pipeline. We do fairly sophisticated analysis of the kinds of students who come to Bloomsburg University, both from their financial profile as well as their academic profile. So there is quite a bit of cost of marketing, but we feel, and we manage it such that the return on investment is very positive. Not sure if that
No, yeah, so basically the schools have their own discretion. They have their own sort of little pot of money that they can use for advertising, however they choose to spend that pot of money to where they want to do TV in the Pittsburgh media market, or however else they want to spend that money, they can spend it wherever and however they see.
That's it. It has to be
buck.
posted up against their overall enrollment management strategy, because there are dollars that also have to go into sending people out to recruit, just like recruiting football players.
Right.
People got to get in a car and drive out to those markets and sit down and talk with high school counselors and students and families, et cetera, and that costs money. The materials that you create that are hard copy, the online capabilities, social media, but each university makes those determinations. But they also know that a little bit of money in that area doesn't automatically go a long way. You have to make very strategic decisions about how to spend your money. Sticking up a billboard in an area where you've never drawn students from before does not necessarily mean you're creating a new recruiting mecca for the institution, and it costs a lot of money to do that.
If I could briefly add, you won't see us in the Pittsburgh media market. I mean, if you look at Bloomsburg University, we know where our students come from, county by county.
Right.
And our market is the eastern half of the state, so we focus within our known market. Yeah.
I see, okay. Well, then that gets me back to the next question, I guess. In this chart we received this morning here, Slippery Rock and Westchester are the two that have grown enrollment the most, I guess, and it's sort of kind of, Slippery Rock isn't in my district, but it's real close, and I was going to ask Logan actually where he lives and how he sort of kind of chose Slippery Rock, I guess, is where he came from, where you live at. Because we were talking about that this morning in the meeting ahead of time, and you mentioned it, I guess, yourself, is that it's the circle of...
Why Slippery Rock?
I mean, yeah, there's a circle of, how many miles diameter from Slippery Rock do you live, and was it that your choice to come there, I guess, is... I'd like to get the answer to that, I guess, if you could.
Thanks, Senator. I'm from Allentown. So for those of you that don't know, that's eastern Pennsylvania, about an hour and a half north of Philadelphia. And the reason I chose Slippery Rock is my mom's an alum. And all through growing up, she said, I went to Slippery Rock. And being a young kid, I had no idea that was even a school. I heard of Penn State, I heard of Pitt, but I always thought Slippery Rock was just some imaginary place. But when
and to some students, it actually is.
But when I was a junior in high school, she goes, let's go take a visit. And I'm like, nah, I've heard of these bigger schools, these bigger, quote unquote, better schools. But ultimately enough, we went on a visit, And going back to the point of the buildings, it was immaculate. I went to this campus that, you know, being from Eastern PA, you don't really hear too much about going off the advertising thing. We don't get commercials for Slippery Rock out here. But just seeing the buildings there, going back to a previous point of the small classroom sizes, and just the experiences, talking to my tour guides, they said that they've had experiences at Slippery Rock that they've loved, and it's also a community. You know, these state schools really embrace a community aspect, from the traditional residence halls to the new residence halls. I just felt like this was a great place for me to grow as a person. I wasn't totally sure quite yet of what I wanted to do, but Slippery Rock was a good school for me to really find who I was, and really gave me experiences to grow as a person. And it was a great middle ground for me, not quite knowing where I was going, but it just provides a lot of opportunities.
I wonder if that's good to know. I'm sort of kind of surprised you came from Eastern Pennsylvania to go to Slippery Rock. That's for sure. Wow, it's that's a stretch. I would never guess that in my lifetime. But one other quick question. I'm about out of time here. As far as you're talking about cash flow and stuff, donations. How much does your alumni play into donations and whatever for your universities? I mean, I know Penn State and them have these big, huge alumni money drives and make millions and millions of dollars. I mean, what are you finding across your universities as far as alumni donations, I guess?
Good question. It's a mixed bag, of course, but every president will tell you they are very reliant on contributions by alum because, again, I mentioned there are 500,000 living alumni all over the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and therefore they're essential to what we do. The high rollers may not be in the number that they are for some of the larger institutions, but the volume that people doing what they can do can make to a university is very impactful. Dr. Souls, specifically?
Yeah, let me be specific. We're ending our first major comprehensive campaign at Bloomsburg. The target was $50 million. Sounds modest compared to Penn State, but it's a very reasonable target for our university and universities like ours. We're at almost 62 million, so we've been quite successful. We've had almost 11,000 alumni donate, and they've contributed about 60% of the money we've brought in. So alumni are the most important supporters when you look for private funding. And I think that's characteristic of all universities, actually.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Thanks, Senator.
Senator Yaw, followed by Senator Mensch.
Thank you. Chancellor, I guess I have a couple of comments and then a couple of follow-up questions, but I'm very impressed with your knowledge of the system. And I'm also impressed with your comments about, it indicates to me you know what needs to be done. And you started off your comments, you're well beyond the time to look at the system. I guess my question is, you know, I think that you know what needs to be done, and you don't have to answer this, but my question is, why hasn't something already been done? And that's a follow-up to Senator Dinniman's. It's like we hear the same thing. You know, last year something needed to be done. I mean, I guess it's time to do it. That's my one comment. You also indicated that 1/3 of the jobs will need bachelor's degree, and I forget what time. I disagree in part, or I agree in part, because I don't think it's necessarily that, you know, if you're going to rely on accountants, auditors, nurses, computer systems, I don't think that the system's going to survive. I think you know, the important question is, where are those degrees? What are they issued in? Not just across the board. I grew up in you know, I'm from Pennsylvania, and I was born in Pennsylvania. It was the 14 state teachers' colleges back in the day, and then it became university. And I understand the geographics of it. It were such that, you know, they were more or less strategically placed to serve that purpose. And I'm not sure that, you know, the geographics work anymore. I mean, we, you know, have superhighways all around, and the internet and everything else. And, you know, that whole concept of needing, you know, a college on every corner, I'm not sure is a reasonable one anymore. I know I met with a college in the Philadelphia area, and I think within I think it's a 20-mile radius of Center City, Philadelphia, there are like 80-some four-year institutions. I mean, you know, Pennsylvania has a lot of opportunities, no question about that. All right, with that, there's been a lot of, excuse me, conversations about this RFP. Are you giving is this RFP, are there guidelines as to what you're looking for? For example, and you may not be a very popular person somewhere along the line in this thing, but is closure an option?
Never buy green bananas.
Consolidation an option? Or specialization? Because you've already indicated one of the things, the colleges are regional, but those that have gone outside their region markets, like Bloomsburg or Westchester, they're thriving. So my question is, in this RFP, are you giving them directions as to where to go? Or just say, don't come back and tell me that everything is fine and this is all warm and fuzzy. That's not what you're looking for. I don't think that's not what we're looking for either.
Yes. No, you're absolutely correct. If the purpose of this exercise is to validate what we're already doing, it'll take care of itself, sadly, and we won't like the result. It has to not only validate what we're doing as is, but also recognize that what we're doing, and I'm generalizing obviously, in the majority of cases isn't working the way it did 10, 15, 20, or even 30 years ago, and therefore there is an obligation to change. And it's a twofold obligation. We're a function of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. We don't exist in a vacuum. Our universities need to help prepare people for the future of Pennsylvania, not where Pennsylvania was 30 and 40 years ago. Some of that still exists and always will, but a good deal of that is gone. And therefore, what's Pennsylvania going to look like moving forward? And I want to really emphasize this point. We can change the business model in our system all day long, and maybe even create a greater sustainability just in the ledger accounting of this thing for a longer period of time. But the heart and soul of what we do on these campuses occurs in classrooms and laboratories. And if we just continue to accept the way we are, and in many cases have been for a long time, and that isn't considered in this change process at the same time, we will be only creating half a loaf. So when we created the RFP for anyone who would be interested in it, that was a part of the charge, is that we need to look at the general fiduciary model that we use, but we also need to take a look at how we're aligned as a system with the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And I don't want to be too parochial on this. We know we're also going to be preparing students who are going to go to other states and even other places on the face of the earth. We've got to assure that every student leaves prepared wherever they go, but we have a specific obligation to the Commonwealth to make sure that we're lined up and preparing students for where the Commonwealth is going to be 10, 20, 30, 50 years from now at the same time. That's a part of that charge too.
Thank you. I look forward to seeing this report. My time's almost up. I have one other question which is a little concerning to me. We had some information about the graduation rate in the system, and the four-year graduation rate that I have been presented is it's less than 50% in the institutions, and that should be a real concern, I would think. And why is that?
And by the way, this is not a commendation of us necessarily, but the national average is about 27%. The feds use the 6-year graduation rate, and ours there again is above the national average. But be that as it may, that can't be our high water mark. If we suggest that as long as we're above the national average, whether it's 4-year or 6-year in graduation rates, that is an acceptable number. We're accepting where we are as the only way it can be. As we look at the alignment of our academic program, as we look at the students that we're bringing into our universities, we also have to make sure that we're always attentive to trying to graduate as many of these students as possible, period. but also graduating them in a timely fashion. That's why there are two graduation times, the 4-year and the 6-year. That's essential. And by the way, those are cohorts of students. So in 2009, a group of students started as freshmen. Along the way, anything that could see them drop out of that cohort, if a student stops out of school to earn more money to come back, they're no longer in the cohort. A student who takes longer to just graduate, they're still there, but they haven't graduated in that time period, is no longer in the cohort. A student who transfers is no longer in the cohort. So I don't want to, I'm not trying to explain to anybody's satisfaction that 60% is an acceptable 6-year graduation rate. We should never be satisfied with that. And we've always got to make sure that we're trying to organize in a way that will continuously drive up not only the number of graduates, but the time in which students graduate. Simple mathematics. The faster you graduate, the less you're going to pay. And therefore, if we want to bring down our student loan debt, and this is not just our system, but nationally, one of our obligations ought to be trying to move students through in a more efficient time so that they don't have to pay for that 5th year, that 6th year, or beyond. That's a part of this thing, too.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Senator Mensch, followed by Senator Langerholz.
Good morning, Chancellor.
Good morning, sir.
Fellows.
Long time no see.
Yes, since yesterday. It's a very long time. Just a caveat to what you were just saying, though. When I was a young man in school, there was something called Vietnam and a draft. And we had to stay in school and graduate in 4 years just to keep the number of credits to stay, keep that student deferment. So there was
I was
an
there
added
then,
incentive.
too.
Yes, sir. Yes. Yeah. We don't have that pressure on students anymore, so perhaps. Anyway, and I'm not advocating to bring the draft back to drive down 6-year to 4-year.
Doesn't matter. We'll be in the newspaper that way tomorrow.
Yeah, more than likely. Don't call it fake news. Let me broaden the context of the discussion around the RFP and drive it to some of the things that we talked about yesterday for the benefit of a more general conversation here. When we look at the budget and we look at higher ed, it's about 5% of the budget, about $1.6 billion. It includes PASHE, community colleges, and the 4 state-relateds, okay? Not all those 350 schools, it's about 320 320 are not in that mix at all. But we are talking about the group that we support as taxpayers, okay? So I want to concentrate the discussion there. And I think your RFP is the time is here. We should have done this several years ago, but you know, the realization has grown. We're at the point now where we need to do it. I'm not trying to redesign at all the RFP. But as we talked yesterday, there's a lot of competition and there's a lot of redundancy in the educational continuum today from what we fund with taxpayer dollars, with community colleges, PASHE, and the state-relateds. In your own documentation, you talk about the per-student costs are increasing when enrollment at a school decreases. Okay, so that's putting pressure on our tax dollars. You're also putting pressure on Penn State. You're putting pressure on Montgomery County Community College indirectly, simply because of that cost and spending inefficiency. Then further in your just point out one other item in your documentation on Appendix B1, where you say that notable gaps exist between the kinds of skilled workers PA employers will need in the future and the skills that universities in the state are currently producing. And we're impinging again upon some of the mission of community colleges, trade schools, and so forth. So there is no one central point in our state structure where the chancellor of PASHE, the presidents of the 4 state-relateds, and the presidents of the 14 community colleges, or their director, come together at any one point organizationally. Yet we have this competition for students, for academicians, and for dollars from the state. Is there any way, or are you in any way going to address some of those issues with the RFP? Are you going to look beyond just PASHE and this competitive environment that is artificially in some ways being created?
Yes, sir. First, in just doing this, there's already interest from other sectors who are going to watch this carefully and understandably to see how they might look as a result of what is recommended for us, because nothing we do impacts others.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but those sectors be community colleges and the state-related,
yes,
perhaps?
Sir. Also, and I would even suggest even the privates. Because we can't hiccup without the possibility of affecting those other sectors, and vice versa, by the way. I mentioned Penn State and the branch campus issue earlier. That was not a function of our system, that was a function of their institution, but it certainly had and continues to have a significant impact on our system. So, as I say, by the end of this, and it's always dangerous to yell at the guy over the back fence what you think of his yard, but nevertheless, I think we've got an obligation. Senator Dinnerman mentioned the study or the direction that came out of the governor's task force some years ago was just that. We need to look at all of higher education, because the one thing, Senator, you didn't mention, understandably, was the amount of money that goes into FIA that goes to both public and private schools. So I think we have an obligation. One of the things I hope that will come out of this actual review is not only the ability to say, here's how we ought to change, but even if we do, if that doesn't change and that doesn't change and that doesn't change, we're just rearranging the deck chairs in our system, and ultimately it isn't going to create the kind of sustainability or access for students that we really want for the system. So yes, we are committed to coming out with a study that will not only say we have to do these kinds of things, but also will acknowledge other things that we believe should be looked at. And by the way, no sacred cows there either. Maybe they're pieces of legislation, maybe they are rules or regulations or obligations, and maybe they are things that happen in other systems that impact our system. So hopefully this will be a major conversation starter, maybe for the first time in a long time in Pennsylvania.
You offered the thought earlier that perhaps PASHE organizationally, from the Chancellor office down, has to rethink this. In your opinion, should there be a super chancellor for all higher ed taxpayer funded in Pennsylvania?
That is done in some states. For example, when I was in Florida, I was the chancellor of the Florida State University system. All public universities, 340,000 students strong, were in that one system. And then there was a chancellor and a board for the community college system, and a chancellor or a secretary of education for K through 12 education. So the governance structure was different there. I'm not saying it was better or worse, but it was different. But what that gave us, that structure, was the inherent ability for the leadership of each of those systems to more easily talk, because there were only three, so there's K-12, Secretary of Education, my system, all public universities in the community college system. We even had one person who oversaw the privates, if you will, not in terms of an actual governing individual, but the person who was the sort of the spokesperson for that group. So it was easy for the four of us to get together on a regular basis and compare notes. We don't have an organized community college system in Pennsylvania. Again, I'm treading on sensitive land here. This is not my bailiwick, but that's just, it's a fact. There is not one organized, even though they work together, but there's not a governance structure there. There is not a governance structure for the state relateds. They are each individual. The most often asked question I get when I tell somebody in an airport who says, what do you do for a living? I'm the chancellor of the Pennsylvania State System of Higher Education. Oh, Penn State. No. And I have to then go into this naughty explanation of the governance structure that has not only our system, but also 4 individual universities that have their own structure, et cetera, et cetera. So it is just not as efficient to be able to organize that way in Pennsylvania. That sounds like a criticism. It is what it is. It's not a criticism nor an accolade. It is just what it is.
As you understand, there's a fairly high expectation, some anxiety within this body for the result that will come from the RFP. So we look forward to seeing that result and being implemented rather in an effective fashion, but the sooner that we can, I think the better that we can.
Well, and again, what we commit is you won't be surprised at the end of the pipe. We'll keep you in the loop along the way. We very much need to do that.
And I know my time is up, but I had to ask Logan this question. What's your major?
I'm a marketing and finance major.
Okay. I was waiting for you to say poli-sci. We were going to talk to you. All right.
You know, I have started to consider that.
Thanks for being here. Good to see a Lehigh Valley boy up there.
Okay, Senator Langerholtz, followed by Senator Wagner.
Good morning, Chancellor. Thank you for taking the time to provide the testimony here today.
Thank you, sir.
There's been significant discussion in the media in the past few years about the rising cost of a college education. Having 3 daughters, 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, I shudder to think of what that cost may be when they reach in successive years in higher education. That being said, what are you doing proactively to educate those coming into school about the rising costs and the steps you're taking to minimize that debt? And I couple that question with the data that I've been provided, the average of the 4-year versus the 6-year, and as I see that, the trend being 6-year graduation. Are you doing anything with that to maybe pull that in line to get students out of college as close to 4 years as possible? And what are you doing to educate those students on the rising debt and what sometimes the debt that they're incurring and the salary that they may be able to obtain, can be cost prohibitive?
Thanks, Senator. I'm going to answer the first part of that, and then I'm going to turn to Dr. Solz on the ground for part of that one, too. I have an inherent problem with the growing number of families that take out the full Monty loans. In other words, we'll just cover the entire cost. Since it's a loan, we'll pay it off, and then he or she can pay off their share of it over time, which flies in the face of the conventional wisdom of how do you keep the amount of money down that people need to borrow. The need, I think, should be driving this more than the ability, and lenders are perfectly happy to loan you all you want, and then worry later about how it's going to be paid off. The only way to close that gap, I believe, is to continue to better educate families as to the actual cost to bear, so that they can make better informed decisions about the total cost, number one, not just tuition and fees. How much does it cost to live in a dormitory? How much is the meal plan? How much are books? How much are the other articulated costs associated? And here's how much it is going to cost you each year projected at our university, so they can make better informed choices. Also, to help students acquire jobs. 16,000 of our students work on our campuses, but obviously we can't hire 100,000 students. But I'll bet you most of you and I in this room, while we went to college, especially undergrad, worked at the same time. That should not be a lost art. The problem that many of our students have is because a lot of our universities are in small areas, the available number of jobs may not be there, but they do go home for summer, they do go home for winter, off times, et cetera, and educating parents that it's better to have a student work, sorry to say that, Logan, but nevertheless, to offset the cost that you're going to borrow, you can pay me now or pay me later. But I'd like to turn to Dr. Solz and see if he might want to address that one.
Well, everything the Chancellor said is what we all try to do, and we definitely educate families as well as students at all of our open houses, which is another major recruiting function, and we have a special session for parents on managing the cost of higher ed, and we get several thousand potential students and their families come to those open houses. So the education is a very, very important part. Also, obviously, finding jobs. It's a double-edged sword with students finding jobs, though, because it may take them away from educational opportunities. So one of the things in that campaign that I mentioned was to bring in resources that will help support students doing international travel, students doing an internship. So we are working at giving students the opportunities to go beyond the classroom education, and every university is doing this to varying extents. One of the things that limits students on doing internships is they can't afford to live in Philadelphia. if they're from northern Pennsylvania or in Washington, D.C. or New York City. So, so it's this very broad thing, and the university is trying to help absorb some of those costs, as well as educate the students and their families. We have thought about, but we haven't done it yet, and it sounds like Slippery Rock may have, based on something Logan said. We have thought about in our general education having, for lack of a better term, and it will be named in a better way, a financial literacy course that every single student takes. That may sound overly simplified for a college student, but I think it could be very, very important to help them manage their current debt as well as prepare them for their future. And that's something being discussed in our curriculum committee right now.
And Senator, I don't want to kill you with statistics, but on this issue of loan default, which is a national issue, people who leave 3 years later default on the loans that they took out. Just to let you know, the national public education average, I'll give you two, the national public university and college average on that default is 7.3%. The national average total, public and private, is 11.3%. Pennsylvania's average is 9.2%, and our Pennsylvania State System of Higher Education is 7.1%. You'd like to always see it be zero, but we work very hard to try to make sure that when loans are taken out, students have the ability to pay them back. And then you got to credit families and students themselves. They're the one who do that. And so that 7.3, which is much lower than most, is a credit to the fact that when they take out a loan in our system, they pay it back. I didn't know also, Senator, if Logan might want to touch on it, although he's got a good thing going because he's such a good student.
I have a lot of friends that have taken out loans. They've talked about different ways of how they'll pay them back. But I also have others that have received merit scholarships. For example, when I was a freshman, I earned a Board of Governors scholarship, which is a full tuition scholarship. So I'm very thankful about that. But it just goes to show that there's different opportunities to really give back to the students, like was mentioned before, on-campus jobs, scholarships. But I don't think it's the worst thing for students talking about a little bit of debt, because it really brings them into what adult life will be like, paying back things that they'll bring back. But this can also go back to the point of an investment in your future. So a little bit of debt now may come back to provide them an excellent opportunity because they have this degree to pay it back. But I have friends of all different magnitudes with this debt, and it definitely is a large concern of their on their plate, but I think that they see it as manageable.
I think I may be out of time. I have one quick question, however, with regard to our veterans. And in recent years, with the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, many veterans coming home looking for more educational opportunities. I'd like you to speak on how you're committed to helping our veterans and what programs you may have that help them to obtain an education.
Thank you, Senator. And I will tell you, when I came here from a very veteran-friendly state in Florida, for obvious reasons, a huge retirement population of veterans, as well as 28 at the time active bases in Florida, you better be a veteran-friendly state, and it was. I was so pleased to come to a system that is what I consider to be, and even by some national acclamation, considered to be a very veteran-friendly system. In the book that we sent you, because I don't want to belabor this answer, we sent you all the facts and figures, but we actually included several pages where we outlined every university and what they do, just some of what they do to be veteran friendly. We also do things on a larger scale like price point, adjust downward tuition rates or fee rates for veterans who want to come to one of our universities. We've established offices on almost all of our campuses that are dedicated to helping veterans along the way navigate some of the challenges of higher ed. So again, it was already, I don't take credit for this, but it continues to be a very veteran-friendly system.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you, Senator Langerholtz. Senator Wagner, followed by Senator Vlahovic.
Mr. Chancellor, good morning. How are you?
Morning, Senator. Well, thank you.
I know my colleagues have covered a lot of questions. One thing, when you gave us the packet, you have an organizational chart, and our executive director, Greg Jordan, has a request that I'm asking for, and what I'm asking for is a complete organizational chart for the agency that includes your complement is 529 people within your organization. That's not the university complement, but I'm asking for job title, job status, full-time, part-time, salary, hourly, total compensation to include salary information and all other compensation, healthcare contributions. I'm curious, like what percentage your folks pay for their healthcare, and you told us about benefits as a percentage of payroll is around 50%. And that's actually very low compared to a lot of other agencies. It may be a fact of the size, the size of your salaries. So, but I want to just, I know we've covered this, and I'm going to be fairly quick, but you talked about, the request for $61 million. So, being the private sector guy, I would like to start at the top of the $61 million, and where exactly is that $61 million? Is it salaries, benefits? Is it for the light bill? Is it for rent, paper clips? I mean, a whole way down to the bottom.
Yes, sir.
It's almost, I'm almost asking a zero-based budgeting concept.
That's okay. I can break it out for you.
So, just want to focus on a couple other things, and I'm very interested in the sort of the faculty side, because I'm sitting up here, and Senator Eichelberger had a report here. The contract, it's no secret that your faculty went on strike this year.
Yes, sir. It was in all the papers.
Would you tell, because people are listening, would you just give us a little background of when that occurred and how many days they were out? And because I know it was a pretty tenuous time for the system, but if you just give us a little background, because I think people, I'm shocked by the number of people that are actually watching PCM, but I think they would be interested in knowing that whole scenario.
Yes, sir. The strike actually came as a culminating point to about a year and a half of negotiations with the faculty union over both issues of salary, benefit, and contract language. I remind people of that because people oftentimes forget that collective bargaining has two sides to it: salary and benefits, and language in the contract, which cannot be changed unless it's changed at the collective bargaining table. We went into the process believing that there needed to be adjustments in both. We knew that as the AFSCME pattern, as is the case in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, was set, that we were going to be expected to make compensation adjustments for all of our employees as a result of that. But we also knew that we were going to have to find changes in contracts that would afford us the ability to have the money to pay for those changes. So one of the things that we began to do with not only our non-represented employees, because we could, but also another number of bargaining units with Me Too language, was to begin to make changes in the health care plan contribution rate, about a dozen changes in the current health care plan in terms of how much and who contributes what. So we successfully navigated that with all of our other units and with our non-union employees. So we got through collective bargaining, generally speaking, but both the issue of the health care plan was still a hanging issue, but also hanging were a variety of contractual issues that we felt needed to be changed for the future of the system, but also some of those would have created greater efficiency and provided money back to the system because of the change that was met. Not in every case, but there were those that fell into that category. We broke down at the end of about a year and a half process, and the strike was called, and it ended up being a 3-day strike before we, late night, made a variety of concessions on both sides to be able to put everybody back to work on what ended up being the following Monday. So that was the nature of what we did.
So during this whole year and a half of negotiations, at any time were people not paid?
No, sir.
So paychecks continue to roll. So I find it fascinating. I would like to point out that I believe if I'm correct, what was negotiated and the end result in 16-17, 17-18, and 18-19, which is a 3-year period, with increases and step increases, the increases are 12.25%. So that's a little over 4%. Rate of inflation is under 2%. And the other thing I'm going to ask for, and I don't know whether I need to file right to know request, I'm requesting that every university supply to us a list of, in ranking order of, the faculty and what their salaries are, basically W-2 information from last year, because I know there's some, the famous Westchester swim coach has a base of 80, but he gets another over $200,000 in, he got for selling snowballs and other projects he's working on. So I'm interested in the breakdown because you talk about the average salary being 85. I think, and I'd like to know whether, of the salaries, are they full-time, part-time? You've talked about the number of hours they spend in the classroom. But I also want to, so did your agency facilitate the strike? Did you basically say that the teachers, I'm just curious, I think people need to know how this whole thing works. I mean, who directed the teachers or the faculty to go on strike?
Yes, sir. That's actually a very good question, and you're right. When I talk to average folks, I am one, but when I talk to average folks out there, they're not sure how all of this works either. No, the system does not call a strike. That's a little confusing because a lot of times people read that this thing is going to happen and assume that both parties agree that there will be a strike. No, that's absolutely not the case. That is a decision made by the bargaining unit. It is made after several rounds of votes. One is a preliminary vote on the part of a lot of the leadership to decide if the environment may require a strike. Set the stage if it becomes necessary in their feeling. 2, then there's a general vote of the faculty at large. That doesn't trigger the strike exactly, but it does say that the faculty is supportive of a strike should an actual day and time be forthcoming, and then that's the final vote, again, back to leadership about the actual date and time, which then triggers the strike itself. And all 3 of those things occurred, and that resulted in that 3-day strike. But during that time, we continued to negotiate because the last thing that anybody wanted, but certainly us, was to lose our faculty to a strike for any period of time. And so we continued to try to negotiate through the process to avoid that.
So I'm just curious, what union represented, or were there multiple unions or one union?
For
the faculty that went on strike?
APSCUF is the general representative of faculty and coaches in our system.
Okay, and that would be one of the public sector unions. It's not a trade union. That would be the public sector union.
Yes.
So actually, that seems like a pretty powerful union on this system.
The process that exists that I have found since coming to Pennsylvania is a very powerful process.
Okay, but in no time now. Even when the teachers went on strike, were they compensated for the time they were off?
No. According to the rules of engagement, you are not compensated unless other arrangements are made later. You are not compensated for the time that you are off in a strike.
Actually, you just used a very interesting term, rules of engagement. That's a war term that's used over in the Middle East when we are engaging in war with an enemy. So, wow, that's pretty interesting. Rules of engagement with the university system and the teachers. I find that fascinating. So, we will write to you and make a formal request. But I would like, I think your 13 or 14 universities, if we could get a breakdown. Of salaries.
To my knowledge, I'm not an attorney, but I think everything that you have talked about, help me, is available. I'm not even sure you need to go to the individual universities for it. I think we have that, and it can be made available.
Okay, so I'm just curious. Yesterday it was reported, by the Patriot, or yesterday or the day before, about it was the 100,000 Club, and it's reported that a Westchester swim coach made over $300,000. How did that happen? I mean, you're telling us the average salary is $85,000. I mean, I'm curious, there are people out there listening that could apply for that job?
Yes, the swim coach at Westchester is apparently well-known and runs summer camps, or camps in general. I'm not sure if they're all in the summer, but runs a large number of camps. The agreement, as I understand it, that particular coach has with the institution is that when those camps are run, and sizable amounts on a per student, because these are kids of all ages, pay to be in part of that camp, are kept by the swim coach, some 20%. And also the rest goes to the university. So the university gleans a substantial amount of money from that operation, and they are apparently wildly popular. So his coaching salary is similar to other coaching salaries, but the significant amount of money that is generated through that camp is where the additional compensation is derived.
You mentioned his base. I think I read the base was around 80,000. So this leads into another question. So at a point, if this coach retires, will his pension be based on his base salary of 80,000, or will it be based on his total earnings of 300,000 or more?
Lois is telling me it depends on which pension system he is in. If he is in SERS, and I don't know whether he is or not, the answer would be yes to your question, total compensation.
Yeah, so his pension would be based on 300,000, and so it would be safe to say that he would retire with 200,000 a year, which at least be 2/3 of the 300.
If that is the case, but I don't know the answer.
Wow. Do you have a hotline that people could call? This is like the deal of the century. So I just think people need to know. I mean, we have a pension crisis right now in the state of Pennsylvania. I mean, it's just wild to me that how the system works. So I thank you today for your participation today, and continue to do what you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator Wagner. Senator Vlahovic, followed by Senator Street.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know it's late in the hour, so and I have a lot of questions, but we'll just cut them down here. We'll get them a different way. First off, I just want to make a comment. I see Cheney at 4 years, 7.9% graduation rate, and at 6 years, it's 17.5. Now, that is, it looks to me, if we go to the closest in the 4-year rate, which is not very high, but you'd have to bring them up 24 points. And for a 6-year, you'd have to bring them up 32 points. How could you even do that? I mean, how is that possible? So I guess what I'm getting at, if these rates have been here for a while, why has it took so long to address this? If we were going to really help that school exist, because I'm a big believer in education because of personal things in my life. I never got that college education, but I want everybody to have one, and I like the local schools. But I think we have sat idle too long on some of these things, and in your RF, and that brings me to the RFP. We've had a lot of questions about the RFP. I don't know how you put the RFP out there. There are so many tough questions to ask in that RFP, and I'll probably shoot myself in the foot on this one, but I see you said somewhere around 500,000. I have seen for the cost. I've seen some studies done that I just cannot believe the cost that they're charging to do these studies. This seems very reasonable, but I'm wondering if the questions that are being asked are not hard enough questions or not all-encompassing. And, I'd like to, I think we all need to see the RFP. And if we have questions about that RFP, I think there should be some way that through the education committees, I'm not trying to do their job, I'd have my personal input into it, that we could come back and say these questions are not being asked. Because if you do your study and you come back at the end of June and we ask the following questions and say, well, we didn't ask that question, then we're 6 months more down the line or whatever, come out with another RFP. And because of the situation we have with the state schools, and I have a lot of my kids are going to some of these schools that aren't doing well. I'm concerned about it, but these questions have got to be asked.
Yes.
So we need to know what these questions are that are being asked in this RFP.
Well, as most of you know, based on the procurement process, the RFP is only so detailed. Once you acquire the services of the actual consultant, you have the ability to put the finishing touches on this thing. The reason I say that is because, consultants need to come in with their eyes wide open as to what the general expectation is, but even after acquired, you've got to give them even more specific direction in terms of what you want to see beyond the general framework. Why is that important? Because as we continue to work on this thing, and things like this are very helpful, it helps us to be able to make sure that we're going to be able to check off as many important things as we can. There will also be things that are going to come up during the course of the process that we may have to amend by way of actual change in approach with an RFP that was already let and already started, and you do have some flexibility in that regard too. Because as was mentioned by the Senator, once we start hearing from faculty, from students, whoever it is, we may think, gosh, we should have thought of that, and we need to look at that. We have some flexibility in being able to adjust along the way as well.
So how's and excuse me, because I've never done an RFP, but the 500,000, so that has the ability to work within the 500,000 or you can add to the 500,000 for the addition you want to do?
Both. We've actually said under 500,000, but consultants always know that they have to have the ability to evolve during the course of carrying out an RFP. You just can't ever be as specific in the RFP itself as you wish you could be, because you are going to find things as you go along the course of this. So
I think a lot came up today, and I think there will be more as we start thinking through here. You know, for example, part of the RFP, and I don't know if you can continue it based on their findings, but the campus, like what do you do with a school campus if you close it? Like, for example, Clarion, that town is based a lot of that town is based on that college being there. But let's say you would close Clarion. It's way up there in a isolated area, as a great little town, but everything revolves around that campus. And then you have all these campus buildings built for certain suitabilities. Mm-hmm. What do you do with, there should be, maybe it's something else that has to be done. What do you do with these campuses? Do you try to get rid of the whole campus? Or do you try to parcel it out? I mean, there needs to be a plan set for this, because as long as there's not a plan, and we know certain things we have to do, and I don't know. I mean, maybe the decision, like I said, 7.9% and 17.5% and giving money from the other institutes. The decision on Cheney is probably already pre-made without the stamp until the study comes in. But there needs to be some decision what's going to happen to that, and can it be put to some other value for some other educational purpose for the people that could use it there?
It's a great question, and the answer is this. First of all, these campuses are Commonwealth assets. They belong to you. We do not have, as a system, the ability to sell off university property to people other than using it for our own purposes. We don't have the ability to lease it. Only under certain covenants can we do that. So you had mentioned Cheney. If what we discussed yesterday was trying to create a sustainable Cheney for the future, and starting with a reasonable number of students on that journey rather than trying to grow in to a larger number of students over time, not just the theory, but ultimately the obvious outcome will be there will be a lot less people on a campus. And it isn't just Cheney. We've got other universities where there's a lot less people on them now, even before we start this journey. So to the point that you're making, or I believe that's your point, is A, what do we do with mothballed facilities today? And what are the other alternatives that exist? And that's one of the things we hope we can look at during the course of this review. Are there other usable options for available space than just saying, hey, if it can't be used for this university, it can't be used, and therefore it's just going to have to be supported with money to keep it up? Demolition is not always an option. So what are the other possibilities? But because that's the approach I think we're taking as a system, is not to say, well, just shut it down. Cheney, a good example. Let's find a different approach that's more sustainable, that's also going to have other residual impacts as it relates to getting it there. And facilities is a perfect example. But bottom line, where I started on this one, the property that these universities sit on and the assets that are there are Commonwealth assets. And if there are going to be sizable changes in that regard, that's one of those issues where we may actually have to come back to the General Assembly and ask for flexibility in terms of how we use some of that in the future.
And just as far as debt goes, the total debt covered by the PASHE system and broken down into different schools, I think Senator Baker asked for that.
Yes, sir.
I think it's part of the whole picture.
And we will get that to you, and when I say you, all the members of the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Wolokovich. Senator Street, followed by Senator Killian.
Good afternoon.
Good morning, sir.
Thank you for your
Afternoon.
time. Want to point out, I understand we have time constraints and that folks have talked about a lot of these issues, but building on some of my colleagues' remarks and some of the things that have been said, there is a lot of talk about metrics, and there's a lot of talk about our role in the assets that we have. Clearly, as you pointed out, the campuses, the buildings of all of the PASHE system are assets of the Commonwealth. And when we make decisions about where we're going to place resources, we're making an investment in terms of assets. And as is frequently pointed out by folks on both sides of the aisle, that includes assets as to all of the people who run those institutions. Metrics and data are great to evaluate decisions. But as all of us know, metrics and data, depending on which metrics you look at and which data, they can drive the nature of your decision. When a business decides where it's going to make its investment, it tends to focus on where there is the greatest market. In educational institutions, one of the factors that you mentioned earlier is that they tend to draw regionally and from their population. When you look at Cheney University, you have to look at is there a population to draw from? Well, Delaware County is one of the fastest growing counties in the nation. Montgomery County is also a growth county. Philadelphia County is a growth county. Chester County is a growth county with respect to population and job growth. And so it would seem to me that there is an administrative failing if in an area that has a growth for a population growth, when neighboring institutions are able to grow at some of the fastest rates, when Cheney University has not been able to grow. There are a growing number of jobs in the Southeast, unlike some regions of the state where those students are coming from. And so there should be a way to place them there. And to the extent that the PASHE system hasn't found a way to take an institution which is positioned in a place where there is growth in terms of the population pool it's growing from, there is a need for the educational services that are provided, and the historical trends in terms of where students come from that were mentioned by President Bloomberg would suggest that there should be an increasing population, but in fact we have a decreasing population. So some would suggest is that gives rise to, well, the metrics would suggest, is there a need for Cheney? I think the metrics would suggest that there is a need for Cheney, but the metrics would suggest a failure on the part of the PASHE system to appropriately utilize a resource that we have at our disposal to appropriately give us the return on that investment. And I would suggest, moreover, that when we have these conversations about the physical positioning and the need for people in rural areas to have population centers and employment, this and the goals of the overall Commonwealth, educating people is a net gain to the Commonwealth. Unlike incarcerating people, which is a net loss. It's just an expense. When those people leave, they are less likely to be productive citizens in society. When we educate them, they are more likely to be productive citizens in society. So we had great outcry about closing institutions which employed people in rural areas because of the need for a rural population. But now we have an institution and several institutions which are located in rural populations where those people would be hard pressed to find additional jobs if we didn't. But the product that they're selling and the market that they're selling in is a growth market and a product that's needed. But yet we have not found a way to make that work. You know, I'm being candid. From where the people that I represent believe that Cheney should continue to exist. The metrics that I would evaluate this would suggest that there is a market for this institution and many of these institutions to continue to exist. What I would suggest is that there seems to be a failure on the part of the PASHE system to appropriately utilize those resources in a way that, one, increases the return on the investment for the asset, and two, appropriately allows us to maintain both helpful employment and educational opportunities for the students of Pennsylvania. And I would just hope and suggest that you look at some of these when you're developing your metrics as to how to evaluate an institution. Thank you.
If I can, as you might imagine, I get the question a lot, not just about Cheney, but about many of our universities. Whenever they're going through a difficult time, the question I get from a lot of folks is, who's responsible for this? Because everybody wants to identify the villain. I can assure you, as it relates to Cheney, it would take us more time than you have in a public meeting to talk about the number of individuals, groups, and constituencies who have led Cheney to where it is today. That is not to pass the buck, because it includes PASHE, but it also includes such a large number of people, not only in Pennsylvania, but outside of Pennsylvania, from accrediting bodies to the United States Department of Education Office of Federal Financial Aid. I can go on and on about the number of people over the years who have turned a blind eye to and not acknowledged long-standing problems in that regard that never seem to show up when the real rub begins. And please believe me, Senator, that's not meant to pass the buck. The real question is, do you want to spend a lot of time doing that? Not you, sir, but just generally. Or do we want to figure out, as was stated yesterday, where are we going to go with Cheney in the future? It wasn't a question of closing it. It was a question of how do we quickly pivot Cheney to a sustainable institution of higher education that still makes teaching and learning the paramount import for its students now and into the future. And that's where we've got to go.
Well, you know, I, for one, am interested in moving forward. You know, unlike some of my colleagues, I don't enjoy as much of a historical perspective, and some would say that's a flaw, and some, I guess, would say that's an advantage, because I'm just getting here. It's my first term and first set of appropriations hearings. That being said, I'm interested in the discussion about how we move forward and make it productive, but I merely wish to point out some of the metrics and data that would suggest that there is potentially a very strong future for the institution if we appropriately invest in a wise way and utilize the resources and the market factors that are available to us.
I fully agree with that. Yes, sir. And as does the board, because we've had these conversations regularly. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Senator Street. Senator Killian.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chancellor, thanks for coming to see me here today, and we had a nice conversation about Cheney, which sits in my district. And as we look at Cheney going forward, it has a great history, historically black college. It's located in a fantastic area. It's a beautiful campus in Delaware and Chester County. It's probably less than 30 miles from downtown Philadelphia. It's about 5 miles from Westchester, which is a fantastic town, which I think leads to their high enrollment. But as we know, we see significant enrollment challenges at Cheney. So I'm looking forward to the plan to, as you said, make it sustainable, because it is a beautiful campus in a great location. In southeastern Pennsylvania, Senator Street mentioned, the growth in that area, the number of jobs in that area. I think there's some real advantages. There are definitely advantages, but some real opportunities for Cheney as we define the mission going forward and make it maybe a little more specific and attract more students.
Yes, sir.
With that, in the governor's budget, he has funding for the Cheney's Keystones Honors Academy, and I think your documents support that funding. Could you just talk a little bit about that program and why it's important?
Yes, sir. The Keystone Honors Program that provides assistant dollars to talented students who go to Cheney has been around for a number of years. It reached a certain level of funding and then it dropped. And over the last 2 years, with obviously the help of this body and others, we've begun to get that, and a lot of leadership from that guy up there, we have begun to get that number back moving in the right direction. It is as sound an investment in the future of Cheney that this body and the General Assembly or FIA, whoever it is, can make. Why? Because it helps us recruit great students to Cheney, and it provides them important dollars to be able to make the pay. And by virtue of that fact, it's a symmetry that really works. You could argue a lot of things about success or lack of success at Cheney. You can't argue about the continued success of the Keystone Honors Program. And by virtue of that fact, and was stated yesterday, really as we look to make change for Cheney's future, we should be starting with not only continuing but growing the Keystone Honors Program to drawing more and more talented students. And even if a student doesn't technically qualify for Keystone, I'm fond of saying, drawing Keystone-esque students who may not either technically qualify, or maybe in that given year there's not enough Keystone money to provide that student with a Keystone Award. It's trying to make sure that the students that we're bringing into Cheney have the absolute potential to graduate from Cheney. And the Keystone Honors Program has been, I think, a great example of what we can accomplish and should be at the center of what we do moving forward regarding Cheney's future. I hate to sound like I'm giving it a commercial message, but I guess I am. What does that mean? It means we don't have to start with a blank sheet of paper. We've got something there that can be the nucleus as it relates to the future of that institution. And if we're smart enough to be able to take advantage of it and build on that, we can create something that's not only very special at Cheney, but also sustainable.
Thank you. No more questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Killian. Senator Hughes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chancellor, it's good to see you and good to see everybody. I'm going to take a sip. Just as an aside, just to piggyback on your conversation about the Keystone Honors Program at Cheney University, it came out of a consent decree that was signed by former Governor Ridge, I believe in 1996. The appropriations started, and just so that everyone understands this, in terms of the gem that we have in that particular program, it is rated the best honors program of any HBCU in the nation. And it beats out the fabled Morehouse. It beats out, I'm sorry, Senator Street, you're okay. It beats out the famous Spelman, okay. It beats out the incredibly historic Howard University. It beats out our own neighboring institution, Senator Dinniman, Lincoln University, in terms of the #1 honors program in the nation for all HBCUs. I agree with you, Chancellor. It is something that we need to build upon. Let me go back and I'll make a brief statement. Looking around the room with my colleagues, looking around the room with those of individuals in attendance, speculating on other folks, I probably have more history, or at least my family probably has more history with the state system than any member or anyone in the room. I do see Jim Dillon in the room. And I only...
William Penn.
Right. I only say that because my father served with Fitz Dixon and a few other individuals. Some of you may or may not know Mr. Dixon, but I believe his family did come over on the Mayflower. Okay, all right. For real? Yeah, that's right, Senator Brown. Yeah. Very wealthy industrialists here in the country, but were part of the original committee, the original organization that helped put the whole system together in the first place. So I say that was one of the original appointees of the Board of Governors and served on the Board of Governors of the system for about almost 2 decades. I put that out there for this reason. And it's to deal with an issue that was raised earlier. The system was created to be mutually supportive of one another. The system was created to allow these 14 institutions all across Pennsylvania, who more than likely would fall on their face if not for a system. All 14 of them would fall on their face if not for a system for collective work together. And this goes from Westchester to Lock Haven to Shippensburg to Indiana University of Pennsylvania, to all of these entities. That's why the system was created. They were in a problem where they were almost 30 years ago, and a system was created to mutually support them, to lift them up, because they were champions for education and academic success and mobility for their communities. And be real clear about this. You go back in the record, go back in the history book, go back in the understanding. So when you hear conversations of universities or the system supporting universities, this one this year, this one that year, this one another year, it is consistent with the original mission. Now, I'm not making it up. It's in the archives. It's in the history. It's in the original legislation. It's in the original meetings, the notes, and everything else that were involved there. And I thought it's important to point out, all right, so that when institutions struggle, there is a system to lift it up, represented by governors, Board of Governors, all right, which has legislative appointees, all right, members of the administration, and private sector individuals to work together to make this thing work. It is designed to help those who are in distress, or maybe, better said, it is designed to complement other institutions and make sure that we minimize duplication, all right, and that we support one another. It's had its fits and starts. It's had its great successes. It has its problems. It is organic, like we all are, and we all go through ups and downs. But be clear that this issue of supporting one another is what the system was designed to do. Because all these institutions were, before the system was created, were in some level of distress, okay? And then a system was created because somebody felt, and I agree, that it was the responsible thing to do to figure out a way to lift them all up, because they are the only thing in Mansfield. They are the only thing in many respects in Lock Haven. In Bloomsburg, Pennsylvania, that's what you got. You got the university, all right? And it is a driving academic and financial force within that community. And it is a place where folks in that neighborhood can go and transform their lives. So it's important that it be put out there. It's important that it's said for the record. Let me go to another issue. Metrics. Senator Street talked about metrics. We've all used that word. We all used the thing of analysis. And we ran some numbers here, just sitting here at the table. And what is very clear to me, Mr. Chairman, Chancellor, very clear to me, is that university enrollment has declined across the board, directly tied to investments from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Direct investments from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. You look at the numbers, and it's in everybody's book here. You look at the numbers for the state appropriation for 09 and 10, $530 million. In fall of 2010, the system enrollment was $119,000, 119,000 students. All right? Enrollment dropped to in 15-16, or appropriations dropped to in 14-15, excuse me, to $412 million, from $530 to $412 million, and the enrollment dropped from 119,000 to 109,000. Every year, and there was a 4-year consistent appropriation from 2011 to 2015 of $412 million. Every year, we stayed static. Now, we were at 530, Mr. Chairman. We dropped to 412 and just have begun making progress back on appropriation. So, significant appropriation, 119,000 students. Drop in appropriation, very dramatic, 107,000 students. And we cannot separate out that issue, especially if we say that we're committed to low-income, high-quality option that the 14-state system universities provide. That's what you provide, Mr. Chancellor. That's what you provide, Mr. President. That's what you provide, Madam Chair. A high-quality, low-cost option. When we stop investing the money, the students don't come. When we invest the money, the students attend. So if we want to look at metrics, if we want to look at linear analysis and all of that stuff that accountants and guys, that's you, Mr. Chairman, accountants and guys look at, all right, we cannot divorce ourselves from something that's very basic. When the state invests, students attend. When the state disinvests, enrollment goes down. And this is true across the board. If you look at the enrollment numbers for all 14 universities, 12 of the universities had a loss of enrollment. Dramatic losses. I won't go university by university, but I can tell you Mansfield in 2011 was at 3,400 students. In 2016, they were now 2,100. California University, 9,400 in 2010. In 2016, 7,500. Right? 12 universities of the 14 lost enrollment. One essentially stayed the same. That's Shippensburg University. They're of 8,852. They had an increase to 8,891. 29 student increase. Kind of pretty much the same. Westchester University, you'll be proud, Senator Dimon left. Westchester University is the only university in that time period, Mr. Chairman, where there's been an increase, a dramatic increase in students from 14,000 to 17,000. All right? So, the crisis that exists, a growing crisis that exists on many campuses, starting with Cheney, and added on another 3 or so in a very difficult financial problem, which we've discussed, but then can be morphed into other universities because a drop in enrollment, is something that we all need to pay attention to. And in this reimagining or revisioning analysis that we're going to do with the consultant, and university by university, system-wide, we need not to ignore the original mission, some very basic numbers, all right? What the intent is, I think Senator Street talked about this, what the intent for what the system is supposed to be. if we're committed to making it easier for Pennsylvania families to afford to send their students, their children, to higher education, this is the place. It is the state system of higher education. If we don't invest in it, then it won't be that opportunity for our children. I felt it important to say this. Now, just for point of record, Cheney University is under a consent decree from the federal government, so whatever we have to do to help it out, we got to keep that in mind. And I'm glad that the governor has made a decision to make an increased investment in Keystone Honors. I think it's appropriate. And I think it is the foundation for whatever we want to do with the university. It has, as an HBCU, it has a federal designation, so it's got some protections there. It is a great asset, and we need to figure out how it's going to work out, not just for itself, but for the entire system. Because it is a member of the system, so it's got to do good for itself, but it's also got to do good for the entire system. I'm a believer in the concept. And you're only as strong, I think you've heard this before, maybe in Florida, you're only as strong as your weakest link. All right? Finally, I do have to say this, so this is not going to be a question, Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, all right? But I want to pass out a study that was provided to me to the members. And this article comes from the New York Times. And Mr. Chairman, we'll pass it out, but your job is to hand it out to all the members that are not here, okay? Appropriate staff. And the article was written in the New York Times, published in the New York Times, January 18th, 2017, and it's titled, America's Great Working Class Colleges. And it talks about, and I'll condense the article, and we'll make sure that everyone gets a copy of the analysis, the study that the article is derived from. But it talks about the issue of mobility, of moving students who are in challenged income categories, low categories, moderate low categories, into middle income and upper middle income categories. And it looked at every university in the country, poured through incredible details, a lot of statistics, all kinds of analysis. There's about 3,000 universities in the nation. Looked at them all. And it ranked them. And you can go online and you can plug in a university and you can figure out where your university ranks, the one that you're interested in, of all 3,000. And called it a mobility rate. In other words, moving students from low income or moderately low income categories into middle and upper middle income categories. Out of all the universities, Cheney University has the 87th best rate of all of the universities in the nation of moving students from low income to middle and upper income categories. The next university within the system is 599th. In fact, the other 13 institutions within the system rank between 599 and 1807. Now, the one that's 1807 is clearly better than the other 1,200 that are below it, because it looked at all 3,000. But again, looking at metrics, looking at data, looking at issues that Senator Street raised and others have talked about, we need you to make sure that you account for that kind of impact, clearly for Cheney, but for all of the other systems, all of the other universities within the system, okay? Because even if you're at 1807, you're still better than the 1,200 other universities, all right? And how we make the right decision for where we are in 2017 and going forward. Consistent with investment from the Commonwealth, consistent with declining enrollment just generally as the baby boomers, we've all stopped having our kids, okay, all right? So that the universe of young people going to college has diminished, okay? But we'd ask you to make sure that those issues are taken into account in addition to the original reason why this system was put together. It was put together for everybody, not just for a few. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Senator Hughes. Another thing accountants look at once in a while is the clock, especially in relation to their clients when the clock is ticking. So I first want to thank all of you for being here. Thank all the members for their participation. I wanted to recognize my fellow Allentonian Logan for his participation today. If I were in your shoes in regards to what you're doing today, remembering how I was in college, I would be terrified. So you should be really proud. And I know you're the kind of student that I was often exhausted trying to keep up with. So your story about Slippery Rock is interesting because a lot of our students, state system students out of Lehigh Valley, go to Kutztown and to Bloomsburg. So that shows that these institutions, even though they're part of a system, have in many ways unique values based on family histories and offerings. So we really appreciate your story there, and thank you for participating. Just a couple, Chancellor, quick inquiries relating to finance. Page 7 of your information, and I apologize if any of this was asked when I wasn't here. Salaries, it mentions compensation for 17-18 also incorporates an increase of 38 FTEs, mostly faculty related to projected increases in enrollment. Now, we've been talking about decreases in enrollment and increases in enrollment. Can you possibly provide some detail? Don't have to do it now, but where that complement's going?
Yes, sir.
Because in relation to increases in enrollment.
Sure will.
Also, in the same area, page 6, there's an item called planned use carry forward against, I guess, balances and reserves. Could you provide more detail on that as well? Don't have to do it now, but just
We can.
so we know. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Now, we talked a lot about the challenges of the state system today. Studies that you're going forward, I think, are valuable in regards to evaluating the whole system in relation to the communities it serves and the students it serves. We talked about this with the Independent Fiscal Office and their information regarding demographics and population declines in the school age, working age population, growth in the retired age population. Concerning general statistics, you probably could have take a common opinion regarding the general track of the reduction in school age population as it relates to higher education. However, if I'm correct, only 1/3 of Pennsylvanians have a higher education degree. So you can still have growth within that population that we need to get into higher education, because your statistics also show that jobs 2020 and going forward, 60% of them are going to need a higher education degree. So there's a group that doesn't have access yet or hasn't chosen access yet. And as Senator Hughes says, your product is the product that a lot will look to, at least in terms of a affordability standpoint and a program standpoint as well, for access. So I think those opportunities are available to us and probably would be considered during your studies. Senator Hughes is also correct regarding our level of appropriation. If we approve the governor's number, we're appropriating about the same amount we appropriated in 1999. And that really brings into question, where are we going in regards to supporting higher education as a component of our overall budget? We often talk about economic development in relation to taxes and regulations and healthcare costs, but what we hear mostly from employers now, because a lot of those factors are evening out across the country as states compete against each other on a cost basis, is the number one thing that's going to drive employment in the next 20 years especially in high-end employment, is going to be workforce competence, the strength of the workforce and their skills to provide that employer with what's necessary to bring their product or service to market. So if we have an overall strategy for our budgeting and our appropriations going up in corrections and human services and down in higher education, in terms of the studies you're doing with Georgetown and the availability of higher education to meet that need, our overall strategy is going in reverse, essentially financially in reverse to what the economic needs need to be in Pennsylvania, and our ability to attract and keep that working age workforce that will allow for our financial picture to improve. You know, we can go through a process year over year of looking for savings and reductions. We all could do that. You had done that as part of your our collective challenge over the last 8 years. But the thing that will be the most sustainable over time is a growing economy. And if workforce competence is the #1 thing that will drive that, then our budgets, in terms of our conversation on the budgets, should reflect that. So I look forward to working towards that goal along with all of you and the members of this committee. And by doing that, I think we'll make for a stronger overall financial picture for Pennsylvania. So thank you for your time today. We appreciate it.
Mr. Chairman, members.
We'll follow up with any open questions as we go forward. Thank you very much.
Very much.
We will break until 1:30, where we'll meet again with the State Police.